And we're live. Live on YouTube. Wait for
Johnny,
everybody, Andrew.
Johnny Sherburn.
That's the one. Johnny Sherburn.
Cheers.
He's the one who wrote us that really nice note.
Oh, that was very nice. That brightened my day out, actually.
Make
So
sure
now I
to
can
give him
press
a little
record.
shout. Not yet.
Not yet.
No, wait for it.
But we are live, so folks that are tuning in.
So don't say anything silly.
Yeah, well.
I'm
Nothing
not being funny, mate. You
incriminating
clearly
from this
haven't
point
heard
onwards.
our podcast if you're not willing to say anything silly. Right then. Are we all ready on Audacity?
Yeah, I'm just going to check mine.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
No, mine's not working. Super.
Well done.
Yeah, great.
There's half an hour to get ready.
I know. Tell me about it. No, so
Don't forget, he spent half that time running about the kids.
Yeah, to be fair, he wasn't in the room for most of it, was he?
Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
I'll let him off.
Sorted.
Cool.
Okay, are we all ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay, when I say go, that's when you click. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hey. There we go, it's working.
We're live.
We're all good.
We're live.
Recording.
Good. Right.
Good.
Moment of silence. And then I'll do the intro. Okay, welcome back. And welcome to episode 56 of the Hop Edition. And we have a very special guest today. We're going to be talking all things yeast. We have Andrew Paterson joining us from Lallemand, which is extremely exciting. So welcome, Andrew. Say hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hello. Excellent stuff. So we're super excited. We love having guests on the podcast, and we're very, very much looking forward to talking about, all things yeast. So before we get into that, I just want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Brew Keg Tap. If you are after anything keg or dispense related, swing on by to Brew Keg Tap. Excellent service from Johnny down in Cornwall. And also a big thank you to our Patreons. Thank you for continuing to support the Hop Edition. A big shout out to two new Patreons that have recently joined, Johnny Denton and Johnny Sherburn. Big thanks. Excellent. So guys, welcome. Good evening. How are we?
Very good. Thank you, Owen.
Good.
Very well.
Super.
Nah.
Andrew, it's the first
Hello.
question. What are you drinking tonight?
So, in my job, I get to visit breweries quite a lot. And quite often when you go to a brewery, they give you a big bag full of beer. So at the moment, I'm making my way through a nice large box of beer I got from Gloucester Brewery. So there you go, Gloucester Brewery in Gloucester. It's a session IPA, and it's very nice.
Nice can art. Stands out.
Yeah, it is, doesn't it? It's
quite luminous and
they're
Yep.
all like that as well. Yeah.
that's
I've
cool.
not heard of them, Andrew. Are they obviously not all that trad, given they're doing a session IPA? But
No, I think they maybe were once, but if you go in, they do everything really, everything from a bitter to kind of imperial stout, and they've got a really nice tap room on the docks in Gloucester. So if you're in the area, definitely check them out.
There you
sweet,
go.
very, very, very nice, very nice.
Very
So
good, very nice.
very good, very nice. Right, before I swing round to asking the rest of the usual crew what they're drinking, Andrew, do you want to just give us a quick intro? Tell us about who you are,
Yeah,
what you do.
give you a bit. Yeah.
Go nuts.
So, I work for Lallemand, but I am a former brewer. So I started out brewing, 10 years ago now. I went to Heriot Watt and I did the brewing masters there, formerly being a biochemist. And then I worked initially at Brewdog, which
There you go.
when you go to university in Edinburgh and you're looking for your first job in brewing, it's a pretty standard route, to be honest. So I did that, and then you don't last long in the northeast of Scotland if your wife lives in the southwest of England. So
No.
so I did about a year there, and then we both relocated to Brighton, where I was working for
Class.
Darkstar, head brewer at Darkstar.
Yep.
So actually, my glasses are probably the only surviving Darkstar glass of the bunch that I had, because they've all been smashed over the years. But yeah, no, that was good. I was there about 6 years, and then I joined Lallemand at the start of 2018. and my first day was New Year's Day, so my first day was a day off. Fantastic. And actually, I love it. It's a great place to work. So now I cover UK, Ireland, and Scandinavia for Lallemand, and the position is technical sales. So essentially, mean I manage sales to the people that distribute the yeast and the technical support for the end user. So that's what I do, and it's good fun. It's a nice place to work. I really enjoy it.
Brilliant.
Sounds great, and free beer as well. What a bonus!
Most
Free beer
breweries,
and free yeast, I would hope.
So you go to a brewery and they don't give you free beer. You're like, okay.
So Andrew, did you work at Darkstar in sort of Mark Tranter's era? Or?
We crossed over very briefly. He was kind of in the process of setting up his own thing at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, very briefly. But yeah, we did cross paths.
Oh, cool. So, what are the rest of you guys drinking? Tricky, what are you drinking?
So I have got a British IPA brewed for the Craft Beer Channel competition. I went with the Olicana that everybody has to put into it, and it's also got some Mystic and Bramling Cross. So I think a lot of people are going down the kind of Harlequin and Jester route. So I thought I'd just go for something a little bit different. My thinking on this is to try and get a bit of a sort of kind of berry and hedgerow sort of bramble type flavors into it, and it's coming out quite well. It just tastes like it really probably could do with a couple of months conditioning at this point, just to settle those flavors down. Because I think
when's it comp?
I think it's got to be sent in like a week or two. So yeah, I don't. Not got high hopes of it doing too well in the comp, but I think it will. It's decent drinkable beer at the minute, but I think it just needs a little bit of time to calm down, because I do find with the British hops that if you're going big on them, sometimes they can be a little bit raw at the start. Especially with some of these newer ones. But yeah, it tastes good. I used some heritage malt in it as well, and it's got real like biscuity sort of digestive biscuit hobnobby kind of malt flavor to it, which is quite interesting as well, because it's pretty pale. I didn't put much in the way of any coloured crystal malts or anything like that, but Plumage Archer, I think it was that I used it. But yeah, I think there's a couple of maltsters that do it. I think I got the one from Crisp. I think Warminster also have their own version of it as well. So yeah,
Warminster are great maltsters. I love their stuff.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, enjoying it. I think it ticks the boxes for an IPA, but yeah, I'm not exactly holding out hope for the competition at this point.
Oh, you never know. You never know, do you?
Yeah, bit of transport on it,
Oxidation in transit. Might get it right into its peak, right?
Refirm in the bottle,
Soften it right up.
Yeah.
Put it somewhere warm. In a sunny windowsill or something.
Yeah, just skunk that bad boy.
Yeah.
What you need to do? What you need to do, Andrew, is run a homebrew competition on the hottest weekend of the year. That's the best way to do it.
Wise moves.
Yeah. What are you drinking then, Andy?
Me? I am drinking my Pilsner. It's the New Zealand Motueka and Saz.
Nice.
So it was Motueka and the dry hop. And yeah, it was throughout the boil, it was all Saz. And it is amazing. It's so clear. It's got Bohemian Pils, and I think it's got Munich, but I'm doing a video on it. So there will be a video. It's in progress. It's all getting edited at the minute, and I'll go through it all. But I am so happy with it. It's unreal. It was a bit banana at the start when it first but it's now more kind of got this lime. It's just like the lovely lime and that kind of cracker bread, that you get from the Bohemian. So loving it. And the lacing,
reasonable.
Yeah, it's and it's pretty sticking about, so it's good. Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Owen,
I'm drinking the bitter that I made back in July, which has been hanging around. It's tasting all right, actually.
Bit of age.
Right. Yeah, a bit of age on it. So that's the persistently bitter recipe, Chris. Your recipe.
Not even close to it, though, is it?
Well, no, it's not really. Actually, it's the malt bill. Roughly, different yeast, different hops. It's all right. Still hasn't cleared up, despite like 5 months in the keg, and added gelatin to it. So I don't know what happened there. But...
Yeah.
These things happen, don't they?
Yeah, what are you going to do? It's tasting all right.
Blame the
You're going to
maltster.
drink it.
Always blame the maltster.
Yeah, I'll blame the many different maltsters that contributed to the grain bill.
Let's not blame them too loudly, though. We want some of them on the pod.
Yeah.
Is it my turn now?
Yeah, go, Chris.
All right, Andy. So you were talking about your lacing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is low ABV version 3, which I've nicknamed Lil Jon and the East Side Boys. For those of you with a musical taste, you might get that reference. And this is the same malt bill as version 2, the same mash temperature as version 2, but I wasn't very happy with the hops for version 2. Although the 3 blokes that came round, 3 of my mates that turned up and just decided that they wanted to drink one night, they really liked that beer because it disappeared in an evening, the entire keg.
Yeah.
Which I was quite impressed with. I mean, it's that one was 2.5. This one's 2.4 or the other way around. I can't remember. It's just an eminently smashable beer. And this one it's got Citra, it's got Wakatu, and it's got a little bit of Southern Cross in this one. And I'm really enjoying it. It's very, very nice. Clean, crisp, and it's got that body that it needs to not be like drinking fizzy, well-hopped water. It's very, very nice beer.
You're going to give us some statistics, Chris, and
what statistics do you want?
I want it. Well, what was the OG and FG and?
God. Don't look. My PC's delicate enough right now. Don't make me start opening Brewfather as well. I've currently got 14 windows open. Cut me a little bit of slack. I will post it up. I will stick it up on the Discord channel.
We'll leave that one till later then, shall we?
I'll stick it up on Discord and people can have a look at it. But it's a very, very nice beer. But be prepared if you do decide to clone the recipe and you do decide to use it and you do decide to make it. Be very careful with it. Right? Mm-hmm. Make at least 50 litres because you will need 2 kegs to get you through a week. That's all I'm saying. This is drinkable.
Yeah. Easy drinking then, yeah. So...
Well, I'm on my second pint and we are 11 minutes into the pot.
Well, 2/3 by the looks of it. Is that not a well-chilled glass?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
You can effectively just replace your water intake with
there you go.
Pretty much with the beer.
Yeah. It's a great beer, though. I'll post the recipe.
Liver training.
Liver training.
I like that one. It's a driving ale.
Driving beer.
It's driver's lager, definitely.
Cool.
So, yeah. Crack on, then.
Yeah. So that's the full circle of beer. So let's get into some questions for Andrew. So we've got quite a few of the sort of, typical questions that a lot of homebrewers would want to ask about yeast and dried yeast specifically. But before we get into those, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the background of Lallemand Yeast as a company and kind of what they do and where they kind of sit in the market currently, if that's all right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lallemand's over 100 years old. Started in the late 19th century in Montreal by a guy called Fred Schurer, who was actually from Alsace in France. And his name, Fred Schurer, sounds quite German, right? So when he moved to Montreal, Quebec, and set up the company, people just used to call him the German, which apparently is something that they do in France. If you're from Alsace, is they call you a German. My colleagues from Alsace, so I know this. So roughly translated, Lallemand means the German in French, right? So that's where the name comes from. Yeah, so Lallemand, the German, despite the fact that he wasn't German. But it doesn't. It's a good story.
That's cool.
So yeah, they started out not making yeast initially. They were supplying the baking industry, so supplying the baking industry with ingredients, and then they set up their own yeast factory, which I think started producing baking yeast in about 1920. And then, well, probably middle of the century, they started doing some wine yeasts, and then I think the first brewing yeast came along in the mid 90s. And the first yeast that they produced were actually for Boots, the chemist.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so Boots the chemist used to do brewing kits like years and years ago.
Yeah.
And apparently the story goes that they used to use fresh yeast. So you used to get like almost like a compressed block of kind of fresh yeast, like you get sometimes for bakeries that you just crumble up. I don't know if you know the stuff. It's not dried, but it's not liquid. It's like between the two. And that obviously wasn't very shelf stable. So they were looking for something else. And they turned to Lallemand, who said, "Oh, well, we can probably dry that." So they dried the Boots strains. So that was their entry into the home brewing market.
That was a big break.
yeah. I mean, my dad tells stories of the Boots beer kits and being sick down the drive and then having to chip it off because it was frozen in the morning. So it goes back a bit.
Yeah, I've heard some pretty bad stories about the Boots beer kits.
I think that's what put off a lot of homebrewers back in the day.
Yeah,
probably. Yeah,
I think we, like a lot of sort of older people in my family or friend circle or whatever, and I talk to them about home brewing, and their perception is generally pretty terrible.
It's like,
it's very marred by the historic Boots style home brewing.
Thankfully, that sort of kit I think is dying off a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know. You go on certain Facebook forums, Andrew, and yeah, it's still live and kicking.
It's interesting because
the airing cupboard hooch is still out there somewhere if you want to find it.
I do a lot of work in the Scandinavian market, and they don't do syrup kits or extract kits out there at all. Like you can buy an all grain kit in a box that has all the grains you need, the yeast that you need, and everything, but they don't do syrup and they don't do extract, and it's I don't know why. Yeah, it's a bit weird. It's
because they've got standards.
Yeah, they've got good taste.
It's just very, very common in the British market. But, yeah. So where do we pitch ourselves? We probably pitch ourselves as the premium dry yeast producer. And our game is innovation. So we're always trying to come up with something new, something interesting for the market, and kind of trying to lead the market rather than being led by it. So we do lots and lots of work with our own in-house R&D team, but also work with kind of yeast research universities and breweries across the world trying to come up with new strains in that way. So that's kind of the current aim, is to come up with new strains which we can produce in a dried format, which are innovative and interesting. Particularly as like traditionally there's been less variety in the dry side of things.
You guys are
trying to increase
driving that change. Yeah, I would say so. That you brought a lot of kind of that you've brought the new haze, the dried hazy yeast sort of thing, and
and Kvike as well.
Kvike, yeah.
I mean, like even in just the short period of time that I've been home brewing, and the other guys can attest to this as well. Like the dried yeast selection broadly has just like probably doubled in the last few years in terms of variety of strains and availability. It's really nice, you know.
I started in 2018, and I think we've done 5 since then, probably, maybe more. Yeah. I mean, the most exciting from my perspective recently has been the Philly Sour, because that's such an interesting strain, just the way it works, and the species isn't the same as regular brewing yeast, and it's nobody had anything like it, and it's been really good.
I mean, that must be a big seller for you guys, because that was just a total game changer for people who want to brew sours. Obviously, it takes out such a huge amount of effort from the historic kettle souring process that is it a big seller for you?
It's doing really well. Actually, like in some respects, it's slightly annoying because we came up with probably the original kettle souring technique was the Lallemand sour pitch, and now that's the new Philly Sour is cannibalizing our own sales. So we've kind of like come up with this great product, which is eating our other products, which is fine. It's nice to have something that's successful, but it's definitely overtaking kettle souring as a method for souring these days.
Just on that note of the Philly Sour being one of your new products, a question quickly from one of the guys on the YouTube chat. Luke Stevens wants to know if the new GMO yeasts are likely to make it to the UK, because there was some talk about them being banned.
Well, so I actually think you can use GMO yeast in the UK if you label, but you have to have it licensed first. So there was a yeast produced by, well, it's not a company. It was maybe it was a charity. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was called Brewing Research International. It was based in Red Hill in Surrey, and they produced the GMO yeast in 1994, which was licensed for use in brewing in the UK. So I mean that was really early, right? Nobody used it. It was more of an academic exercise to say that you could produce something and you could license it for use. So I'm not entirely clear that it's not allowed. You just have to license it to be able to use it, and then the brewer would need to label it on their products. So that is probably still a bit of a barrier to consumers because GMO is not widely accepted.
In the UK anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think attitudes are changing. There was a survey done by Europa in 2019, which I think it said something like 60% of people didn't really care either way. So I think there's probably some people that are dead against it, and there's probably a large part of the population that don't really care that much, and then there's some people that are quite for it. So it might change in future, but I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I think it'd be nice to be first to the market with that sort of thing, but it is a bit of a risk. I mean, I'd like us to do it, but it's just whether you can or not.
From a personal standpoint, as a fellow biochemist, so yeah, biochemist power, I can't really see that much of an issue with it, to be fair.
Oh, no, and I think, GMO is fairly widely used in the States, and there's not really a problem with it. It's more perception, and frankly, I think in Europe we need to allow these things because we're going to get left behind if we don't. I mean,
yep, absolutely.
The US, bits of South America, China, they'll be going for it. Absolutely.
Nobody in America's grown 3 heads yet, unless they're in Alabama. So I don't really see the issue with that one.
And we produce some GMO strains in the States, but they're only for the United States market at the moment. So
there you go.
And what's the advantage of a GMO strain there? I mean, why would we even want to do it?
Well, you can make very specific changes to a strain, right? So, yeah, in the case of brewing, I mean, let's say you wanted to introduce a gene which would produce lactate dehydrogenase to produce lactic acid. I mean, that's something that we've done for the Salvisier strain, which is on the market in the States. To do that by breeding would probably be impossible. But using a GMO technique, you can make a very specific targeted change. Well, I don't think it was CRISPR actually, because technically CRISPR's patented as a technique, so you would have to pay a license fee to somebody. But
I mean, seriously,
I don't think you can detect it. So yeah.
Well,
no, it wasn't. It wasn't CRISPR, but it was a GMO technique.
Me and you're going to have a conversation off air. As much as I would love to go through every single question that we've got on our notes, there's a few that, now I know you're a biochemist, really interest me, okay? And at the risk of making the other 3 guys yawn and fall asleep, which I honestly don't care about.
And other listeners.
Yeah.
All those Patreon subscriptions.
Out them guys. One of the things that I've been arguing with people about for quite a long time is the wet versus dry argument. Okay?
Yeah.
So just because they won't believe me, but they'll believe you because you work for Lallemand. Are there any benefits to using dry yeast over wet yeast? And are there any benefits to using wet yeast over dry yeast? Go.
I mean, yes, there's pros and cons to each, absolutely.
As far as the actual fermentation process goes,
not really. No. As far as the fermentation process goes, it's as long as you make the right pitching rate, which you'd have to alter with either, you should pretty much end up with the same result. And there's some good papers out there comparing dried with wet and showing that there's very little difference in them. I think one of the reasons people have this perception is when dried yeast was first introduced, like 20, 30 years ago actually was fairly poor quality. And therefore wet would have been better. But that has changed a lot over the years. There's been a lot of work put into dried yeast production, and I don't think it really holds true anymore. So really, there shouldn't be a great deal of difference. And if you look at commercial breweries using dried yeast, they can still repitch it. We produce our dried yeast to a standard where you can repitch it multiple times. And at that point, after that first generation, they're essentially the same thing because it's been rehydrated, it's gone through a fermentation process. It is just a yeast cell in a liquid. So not really. I mean, there's pros and cons in other aspects. So we already spoke about the variety available with wet yeast. There's huge variety available with wet yeast. Dried yeast, there's not quite so many. It's definitely something that's increasing, and that's this is in our list of questions, and maybe we can cover it now. But it's to do with how the yeast cells survive the drying process. So when you're propagating yeast, and you then take it through a drying process, you have to choose a cell that can survive that. And when you put it through that process, what you're looking for is a yeast that creates stress factors that can keep it alive during the drying process. And one of those is, we're getting a bit technical here, is called trehalose, which is actually a sugar. And the yeast cells will build that up within their cells membranes, and it will stop them getting too rigid and breaking. And therefore they will survive the drying process. So
it just adds flexibility into the cell wall. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so you need to look at cells that are particularly good at making that particular sugar. So
see, I told you. Yeah, I told you. You don't listen to me. None of you listen to me. You listen to him, though, won't you? Huh?
It's not that we don't listen, Chris.
You just don't believe anything I say, right?
Very much.
Bit of that.
Yeah,
not that either.
Okay, so whilst we're on that point, do you guys sell wet yeast?
We do, but not in Europe. So Lallemand owns Siebel. You might have heard of Siebel. I don't know. It's
I've heard of them. Yes.
Yeah, it's a brewing school in the United States, and they also do the little vials for the BJCP tasting. So they do sell wet yeast to US breweries, and you can buy it in 1 liter pitchers, and then you would need to propagate from there. They do also sell slants. So, if you wanted a particular strain that exists within the Lallemand yeast culture collection, of which there are hundreds, you could buy slants and you could propagate it up yourself.
No, that's cool.
Why isn't that happening in the UK?
Siebel has been quite US centric, I think, over the years. So they do bank quite a lot of yeasts for breweries in the States, but then there's quite a lot of companies in Europe that would do that for you as well. So I think it's always stayed quite US centric in its focus. But you could buy slants in the UK market from Siebel. It's just that they're quite expensive. So I think they cost like 80 quid a slant or something.
Okay, that's a bit much.
So if you're just doing 23 litres of homebrew, it's probably not worthwhile.
Yeah, you're better off just buying a whole pouch of wet yeast. That's the strain you're looking for.
And I'm just sending you guys slants for free. Well,
yeah,
what
thanks, Tricky.
Don't you dare start. Okay, so a couple of quick fires.
Yeah.
A couple of quick fire questions.
Yeast. Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, I just want to get these quick fire questions out of the way because there's a couple of questions further down that I think are going to lead to some serious discussion. Rehydration, yes or no?
Whatever you like, right? So
nobody gives a shit, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I worked in breweries for many years, and you go to other breweries and they'd be like, "We didn't rehydrate it; we just throw it in, and it works fine." And that rehydration technique was developed many years ago, actually originally for wine yeast. And pitching yeast into a grape must versus a brewer's wort is actually very different. The water activity of osmotic pressure of a wine must is much greater than it would be in a brewer's wort. So actually the environment is nowhere near as hostile. So you're pitching into an environment where the yeast is actually pretty happy. It doesn't really mind. And work that we've done on our lab shows that the statistical difference between the two fermentations is minimal, to the point of being insignificant. You might occasionally see a slight difference in attenuation, but you'd be talking like 1% difference, something like that. So it doesn't make a huge difference. The caveat might be when you're pitching into something that's really nasty, so something that's been soured, for instance, or something that's really high gravity, and then you might want to look at rehydration. But if you're going into like a standard, I don't know, 1047 wort, it's not really needed.
I suppose if it was down
Good.
around 1030, it'd be fine as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just to clarify, because I did use your London strain to do one of my low ABV beers.
Okay. But no, it'll be fine. Absolutely fine.
Oxygenation of wort, yes or no?
Not really required either.
Is there any point to having the added expense like a lot of people do, and a lot of people who post it up on videos of having a cylinder of pure oxygen and putting a blast into wort? Yes or no?
I mean, generally, if you're using dried yeast, no advantage at all. If you're using wet yeast, yes, it definitely help. Some strains like more oxygen than others. I mean, I think 8 ppm is about what you can achieve with air, right? If you want to go higher than that, you've got to use pure oxygen. But if you're using a dried yeast, you don't really need to. And the reason for that is the propagation process for dried yeast is kind of semi-aerobic. And when the yeast is being propagated, it's producing the sterols that it needs in its cell wall for future generations. Whereas if you've got a...
Sorry, is that generally going to be the same even with a really high gravity work? Because that's where you tend to see people talking about, using oxygen cylinders on impy stouts and things like that. But with dry yeast, you just need a bigger pitch rate rather than worrying about oxygen, or?
It's probably better to get... Well, no, you could do both. I mean, you could go with a bigger pitch rate, which is probably what we'd recommend in the first instance.
Yeah.
Just because then you know what you're getting. But if you're going into a stronger wort, you're going to get more cell divisions, right? And therefore your sterol load, which is only produced in the aerobic phase of fermentation. So at the start or during an aerobic propagation, which is what dried yeast is doing. Those sterols are only being produced then. So if you have more doublings of your cells, as you would in an imperial stout, that proportion of sterols is being diluted through the cell membranes as the cells divide. And you might get to a point where you're having not enough. So you could see some advantage if you're going to a very strong wort with oxygenating, or you could just add more dried yeast. Both would work. I mean, I used to brew an imperial stout when I was at Darkside, which I think was 10.5%. And we did do an oxygen shot on day 2, and it worked very, very well.
Right.
Yeah, so you could do both. There may be some advantage to it at very strong worts, but you don't need to in a standard wort.
Okay.
Oh, do I need to carry on? Sorry. Okay, so we've done those two. This is one that I think is going to lead to a little bit of discussion. It is often said that doing a starter with a dry yeast is bad. I personally think this is bullshit. However, you're from Lallemand. What do you think?
I think it probably depends on the conditions of your starter. So, I mean, if your aim for your starter is to grow more yeast and enrich those cell membranes with sterols, then you need to make sure it's really aerobic. So you need to have either air bubbling into it or have really strong agitation to get that air into it. And doing that will create a healthy, larger cell population, which would probably help and certainly wouldn't be detrimental to fermentation. But if your starter is just dunking it in, some wort in a jar over there, what's going to happen is that it's going to be fermenting as it would in a standard fermentation. And the only really advantage to it might be that you get a shorter lag time because you'd be pitching into a wort and it's already gone through lag phase, right? So, yeah, it depends really. I mean, if your aim is to create more yeast and have healthy yeast and it's really aerobic and well aerated, then it probably work quite well. If you're just going into a standard jar full of wort and you're not aerating it, it's probably just going to ferment, and your lag phase might be slightly shorter, but it probably won't have much.
So how would that, Chris? How would that affect with us? Because normally we've got was it a flask with stir plates and the magnetic stir bars? Would that then
by having the stirrer going at the rate that we have it going, where there's literally a dip in the middle, then you are getting additional aeration in the middle.
Yeah.
So if you've got a stir plate, what the gentleman's saying is it's going to work. If you don't have a stir plate, and I don't know anyone who makes starters without a stir plate.
Yeah.
Because you basically
so
might as well just make a beer. They're 20 quid.
Yeah.
They're 20 quid. I mean, fair enough, the glassware can be expensive, but hit me up if you don't know where to get it from cheap. And basically, it's just one of those things. You've got your stir plate, you've got the process going, you've got the oxygenation, well, the aeration, not oxygenation, aeration going in there. I can't see the issue with making a starter using dry yeast if you're doing it that way.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. Yeah, if you're doing it that way and it's got that vortex, will be giving you 8 ppm, so it should be fine. If you're doing that, I can't see a problem with it.
Just to follow on from that, if you've then done the starter at that point, is it then a benefit to oxygenate the wort afterwards, or is that okay because you've done that in the starter
Depends
itself?
if it's an imp or not.
Oh, that's a tough question. It's probably not. It's not going to be detrimental. There's going to be no problem with doing it. So, yeah, I would just go for it. I mean, there's very few downsides to over oxygenation. You can maybe get too much yeast growth and greater losses.
Right.
But if you're just using air, that isn't really going to be too much of an issue.
Okay.
This is just one of those meta upon meta questions, isn't it? Question referring back to a question 3 questions ago that you gave us an answer to, which we're now going to ask a question about. It's like Inception. Yeah, like I've done with asking the questions that I actually really wanted to ask. So feel free to crack on, guys. Someone else can take the lead here.
Well, if we're just going to shoot from the hip, then I've got a question around whether you've got a thiol releasing yeast. Seem to be a big thing at the moment, a bit of a movement happening in terms of particularly the greatest of beer styles, the IPA. Any plans in the pipeline for a thiol releasing yeast from Lallemand?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We've actually assayed all our current strains for their thiol production capability. As a start, that was kind of our entry into that kind of subject. And what you find with brewing strains is that some are better than others, but overarchingly, all of them are quite bad. It's actually to do with the pathway. So the pathway for the beta lyase enzyme actually is inhibited by large amounts of nitrogen, and brewer's wort has quite a lot of nitrogen in it, right? So where you see these strains that are really active, often they work really well in wine musts because they're pretty nitrogen deficient. But when you put them in brewer's wort, they don't work very well. So within the wine collection, I think we have 2 strains. One's called Stency, and I can't remember the name of the other one, to be honest with you. But they're both high thiol producers. As I said, we looked at the brewing strains. Some of them are better than others, but overall, they're not that great. In the US, they're doing a lot of work on this at the moment. There's quite a few labs that have come out with strains. Most of them are GMO, because that's an easy way of getting a strain to produce more in the way of those thiols. They can, make more of the enzyme, or they can activate pathways that wouldn't exist within the yeast anyway. And there's a few like that. So I think this Berkeley Labs do one, and I think maybe Omega do one. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But mostly they're GMO. I think there might be one hybrid on the market, and that's something we're probably going to look at quite closely. So, we've got a lab that makes GMO yeast in the States. So we might look at a GMO, but we'll probably look at a hybrid version for the European market as well. And that's where you breed strains. So that's something we've been doing a lot of work with recently. There's a company we work with in Vancouver called Renaissance, and they are experts in getting brewing yeast to breed and create new strains, which is something that's not easy to do because brewing yeast don't really like to sporulate, and you need to get them to sporulate to make them brew. So we'll probably look at something with them, but I'm not sure where we are in the process. It could be a bit of a way off, I think, a thiol strain for us. I was going to canvass you guys actually to see what you actually think, because I had a beer made with a thiol producer and I thought it was awful. It was really like oniony and garlicky and like all the bad thiols, and didn't like it.
I mean, you tend to like we've talked about this actually, maybe not the last podcast before, talking about that whole oniony garlicky aroma that you get, and actually it may not have even been on the podcast. I think it might just be us chatting one night. I think I sent Chris an interesting paper on it around kind of what is the kind of precursor production and what actually is the compound that contributes to that vibe. But you can get that vibe from a lot of very hopped beers, can't you? Whether they've used the thiol releasing yeast or not. I'm not sure whether we drew a conclusion as to why it happens per se.
We did.
Okay. Chris can regale us with the
No,
detail.
Chris
I
has
was
got all the
drunk.
answers.
I was drunk while I was reading that research paper, but essentially it comes down to 2 compounds and 1 enzyme. Is what it comes down to. There's one particular enzyme that produces a specific compound, and that compound in certain levels can give you the oniony, garlicky type of aroma and to a certain extent taste. And it's all about the perceptibility of it and exactly how much of it you end up with in your beer. And it's a certain thing that comes from a hop. I can't remember the
That's what I was
names of
going to
it.
say. It's
That's what it
generally
was.
it originates from hops, doesn't it? The onion kind of garlic thing.
Oh yeah. It's
Yeah.
and it is like it's part of that beta lyase pathway, which is why it's kind of, I think you've got to be quite careful with that. If you're making a thiol yeast and you're making thiol enriched beers, you've got to be sure it's the right thiols, because otherwise it's. I mean, I really don't like the onion garlic thing, and when I get a beer like that, I'm like, oh come on, why did you put that out? But it's probably quite hard to not put it out, because it's hard not to make it do that.
Jeez,
Yeah.
I think it's tough.
And when I said, I'm not sure if we came to a conclusion, I think in my mind it meant, did we work it all the way back to a key process difference or a key ingredient difference, or how do you avoid getting that? I'm not sure whether we got to that level of conclusion or not.
I
think that's tough, because your hops are always going to have different levels of precursors, season to season and variety to variety. So
yeah.
There was no way to back it right the way up to that, because I mean, as Andrew's just said, depends on the hop that you put. I apologize for the noise. Fucking Andy's just put a new not Andy in Scotland. There's a bloke called Andy who I live near. He's just put a new sequential gearbox in his Impreza.
nice.
So that's what you can hear. Yeah, sorry.
But actually, Chris, we can't actually hear anything.
All I can hear is that, and I've got headphones on, so the mic's doing its job. But it was. We couldn't narrow it down to a specific ingredient, but we could narrow it down to a process and a pathway, which was about as well as we could do from the paper that we had.
Yeah, so it's almost the conclusion there is, if you're going to be making really hoppy beers, you're dealing with live products, and that sometimes it happens.
Class.
Shit happens.
Yeah.
Here's a question.
Which is a commercial product is like, you don't want that to ever happen.
It's a bit of a gamble, right? Question, in terms of something that triggered in my mind when you're talking about kind of you watching, or Lallemand kind of watching carefully about what others are doing in the market. Where do you stand in terms of this whole kind of innovation step that you're now taking in terms of trademark, copyright, patent type stuff? Does that exist more now than it did before? Because apparently I was led to believe that yeasts couldn't be patented because they...
So it depends, right? So yeast can be patented for certain processes and can be patented if they contain certain pathways or discoveries. It does get a bit wishy-washy, but most of the yeasts out there, right, can't be. So let's say, for instance, Lallemand Verdant. There's nothing to stop somebody taking that strain, going down the road, making their own version, slapping their label on it, and saying, "Hey, we've got a new
hazy yeast,
a New England style yeast that produces this, this, and this." And
so
people do that. And I mean, it's not just that. Like it happens all the time. And yes, it annoys us a bit, because I mean, our pathway for yeast creation is about 3 years, and we do all the characterization behind it, and we do all the genetics, and it produces this chemical at this temperature, blah blah blah. It takes forever. And there's nothing to stop somebody just saying, "Okay, well, we've got somebody over there to produce a dried yeast for us, and we're putting our label on it." And done.
That particular example, you had to clean that yeast up as well in the first place, didn't you, to isolate it from a few other
we did,
ones that were floating around in their mix?
I mean, to say that, there's nothing stopping somebody taking our brick of dried yeast and doing it with that. So it's a bit tough, but I mean, we like to kind of stay above that. We do our thing. If they want to do that, they do that. So that's fine. But you can patent some particular things. So, I mean, there's quite a lot of wine yeasts out there that are patented for use in wine. So you could use the strain for use in wine. But most of the strains that have been around forever, like strains like Verdant, it's probably got a background like hundreds of years. It's been around for a long time. Maybe not hundreds, but up to 100, let's say. You can't patent that. Right? Rumored to be, yeah. But for instance, some of our newer strains, like the Farmhouse and the Nova Lager.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so we've produced those in collaboration with Renaissance in Vancouver. And the hybridization technique they've used included a strain from the University of California, Davis, that they've licensed, which prevents H2S production. And that part of the strain is patented, so that can kind of protect your strain in some ways.
That's cool.
Yeah. Beyond that, you can trademark the name. So we can say, like, let's, for instance, London, Loughborough, Nottingham, for instance, nobody can call their strain that because we've trademarked the name, but they can still produce the strain.
Yeah. That's probably what I was getting at.
When you take it to GMO, then yeah, absolutely, you can patent protect that because that's different.
So you touched on the new farmhouse yeast you've got. I've literally just bought myself a packet of that yeast, and okay. I like a farmhouse yeast. I like a farmhouse beer. Andrew, can you tell me a little bit about it? What am I doing with it?
Absolutely. So the rationale behind that was a saison strain that doesn't produce SDA, right? So that was the initial thinking behind it. So we've got a saison strain that we safe for use in breweries. If you look back 5 to 10 years ago, people would use saison strains in their brewery. They wouldn't really understand what Diastaticus was or SDA. You'd get exploding cans of bottles, and in recent times, a lot of people have invested in canning and bottling lines. And that kind of problem is now a much bigger thing, right? There's going to be much more of a problem when you've got cans and bottles than it would be if you've got kegs or casks. There's still a problem, but less so. So it's become a real topic of conversation. There's a lot of breweries that just don't want to put an SDA positive saison strain in their brewery. So we thought to ourselves, what can we do about that? Saison's a nice style of beer, it's a lovely flavour, but people don't want to use SDA. And you can see it in the sales of saison yeast. I mean, getting like that a little bit. Partly that's a trends thing, craft brewing definitely moves in trends, but partly it was because people didn't want to dice with the Diastaticus gene. So the strain was produced by hybridizing a Diastaticus saison yeast with initially a maltose positive brewing yeast to create a hybrid. And then that hybrid was hybridized with a wine yeast, which was including this sulfur negative kind of characteristic, so it can't produce H2S. And then from the brewing side, it can break down maltose and maltotriose, but it can't break down dextrins because they've selected for a strain that won't break down dextrins.
Over a long period of time as well in the bottle, I take it. Was the...
Yeah, I mean, it's SDA negative, so it can't break down any dextrins at all.
Yeah.
So it was quite a complex process. So I think in that process, they created something like 60, 70 strains. And then they have to whittle those down to the strains that kind of retain the saison characteristics without the SDA characteristic. So it's quite a lot of work.
Yeah.
Sounds it.
The strain itself is it's more on the kind of the bubblegum side of things, so a bit more kind of DuPonty than Frenchy, less of the pepper. So it's actually quite different to the Belle Saison, which is the other saison strain that we produce in its character.
That's cool.
That's good. That's good. Actually on the side of what I prefer over the peppery saison vibe. So yeah, I'm down with that.
I think Andy's a fan of that either. The
I like
version.
No.
Could you just go rewinding a second for the benefit of the listeners? Go a little bit more into the whole Diastaticus STA positive thing as far as what that actually means and why that can cause those sort of issues that you're talking about there, because I think that's obviously quite a big part behind the development of that yeast, and I think some people would be interested to hear about that.
SDA is something that's been around for a long time, but people have only really started paying attention to in the last probably 5 or 6 years. From a yeast producer's perspective, it's an absolute nightmare because it's like, how low is low enough, and everybody's kind of testing everything for SDA. So there's really nowhere to hide. It's tough, and there's definitely yeast producers that have come a cropper with that with SDA. So it's a gene that encodes for a glucoamylase enzyme, right? And a glucoamylase enzyme is an enzyme that can break down long-chain complex sugars into simple sugars. So at the end of a standard fermentation, you're left with alcohol, water, and long-chain sugars, which are termed as dextrins. And ordinarily, you put that beer into a bottle, you might do a bottle conditioning process, whatever. You get carbonation and all would be well. If you happen to get a contamination problem with an SDA positive gene, yeast, it's going to create this enzyme, glucoamylase enzyme, which is going to be secreted into the wort or the beer at the end of fermentation. And it's going to start to break down those complex sugars into simple ones. So all of a sudden, you've put your beer into a bottle. You've added your bottle conditioning yeast. You expect your conditioning period to be like, I don't know, 7 to 14 days in a nice warm place. And what actually happens is that yeast starts to break down all the complex sugars, and your priming sugar effectively goes like this because it's creating glucose in the bottle. And therefore the yeast continues to ferment, and it'll compete fermenting until all of that complex sugar is gone. And if you're lucky, you'll have a very foamy beer. And if you're unlucky, you'll have a bottle that goes bang. So that's diastatic yeast. And you can see why it's a problem for people. Particularly if you're running your beer through a canning line and you're not doing anything sort of filtration. So, craft breweries, they don't sterile filter anything, they don't pasteurize. They're going to have live yeast in that can. And if that live yeast happens to be Diastaticus, it's going to cause you a problem.
So is Brettanomyces then, is that a Diastaticus strain, because that has the ability to break down and or ferment dextrins, doesn't it?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah. I'm not going to commit to that because I think some are and some aren't. I think it does depend. But yeah, the strains like that will break down dextrins. Brettanomyces certainly at the end of a very long kind of lambic fermentation is going to be chewing up the residual sugar that's there.
Yeah.
As well as the
Sorry,
SDA though, just to jump in on this particular point, there's also from my biochemical understanding anyway, there's also a certain amount of hydrolysis that can occur of those particular sugars. You can get cleaving of the longer chain sugars producing the shorter chain sugars, which can end up being fermented anyway. Because I've noticed that that's happened with impies that I've made, where you're leaving them for a while and you start off with, your fermentation's finished, you've left it for 4 weeks, your gravity hasn't dropped at all, and then you put it into a keg, and all of a sudden you start to get this hydrolysis, and you end up with fermentation continuing to give you carbonation without actually having added any priming sugar or anything to them. And that's what I found, as well as obviously the issue with the SDA strains as well. The hydrolysis can also be an issue sort of going further on down the line as well.
It could also be, particularly in an imperial stout, that your yeast has slightly run out of steam. And during the bottling process, you get enough aeration that it kind of goes, okay, I'll have a crack at some of these sugars that are left over. And that can definitely happen. So yeah, that can be a problem as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Tricky.
Maybe less of an issue than SDA, just because it's going to stop at some point, but...
So the whole STA thing, is it something that, like, once it's into your brewery, it can be quite difficult to get out of it? Because I remember going to the Brew Point brewery, the new Charles Wells place, which is local to me, for a tour, and
it's fancy, that.
It's very fancy, but I remember the brewer specifically mentioning STA and how obsessed he was with trying to keep it out of the brewery system. And I thought, oh, well, it must be fairly hardy if you're worried about it getting into a system like this that, must be pretty heavy on the cleaning kind of,
It isn't. It's not more hardy than a standard brewing yeast, right? It doesn't sporulate better. It's not resistant chemicals or anything. It's just that it's quite hard to eliminate all yeast cells from your brewery, even if you're cleaning very well. So like a pump seal. Yeah. Like an O-ring, let's say you've got some non-food grade kit and it's got like plumber's tape for everything on some of the threads. Like, it's very hard to eliminate every potential source of contamination. So some breweries would rather not use it. That being said, I know many breweries that do use saison yeast and don't have a problem because they clean very well. So it's one of those that I think you have to be very aware of the risk. That's not to say you shouldn't do it.
And I guess when you're brewing at that sort of scale, it's a bigger issue because if it gets into a batch of that kind of size, that's a lot of kegs or cans that you've potentially, cocked
absolutely
up. Yeah.
I mean, one of the big conversations at the moment, we're doing something with ASBC in the States, is like how much Diastaticus yeast is too much, because, you might have like 2 or 3 cells in there and you might be able to pick it up on a PCR test, but is that actually a problem? Where's the limit? Where's too many cells? Where does it cause an issue in the brewery? And that's hard to define.
I bet.
Okay.
Got a quick fire question for you, Andrew. From someone in the chat. Name your top 3 UK and non-UK breweries. Just change the subject.
Oh, that's tough. Yeah,
put you on the spot.
I know.
Yeah. Ooh.
Just change. We'll change the flow.
Non-UK. Stieg Brewery in Gothenburg. They're very good. I like them.
Danish. Wow.
Yeah. No, Swedish.
Sorry, Gothenburg, Sweden. I'm going to get shit from J-Fork now. I'm Swedish death. I'm going to get crap forever.
And then I am partial to a German lager. So Augustina.
We are brothers from another mother. I'm telling you.
So is that something biochemists?
I really like
gang.
really do like German lagers, Czech lagers.
Yeah,
can't go wrong. Can't go wrong with that sort of thing. Where else have I been? I've been to some really cool breweries recently, but I forget everybody's because they all blend into one because you've been into so many places. Thiol, quite like Thiol. Do some really good stuff as well. They're Denmark. But yeah, as I say, like it's tricky to choose one. I mean, UK, my oldest favourite is Harveston. I love their old engine oil. Absolutely great beer. Fantastic. Can't go wrong with that.
One.
You've not had old engine oil?
No.
It's like the best beer ever.
It's on the list now.
Oh, honestly, well worth it.
Oh, well, there you're getting shouted at by J4. Jesper's in Denmark, and he says, "Tool, no, try Arben." I'm probably pronouncing
I've
that
been
wrong.
there. I've been to Auburn. It's Auburn.
Auburn. I'm pronouncing it completely wrong.
I went to the old brewery in Auburn, which was it was at like I think his mother's barn or his mother-in-law's barn. It was really like kind of traditional Danish barn buildings where they kind of build them with 3 sides. So you've got a barn there and 2 barns there, and it was in this barn. But I think they've since moved to a brand new site in Copenhagen, which looks really fancy. So I will go there at some stage, but I haven't been yet. So.
Okay, come on then, UK. You're giving us 1. Give us 2 more.
UK. Oh, it's tough. I do like Verdant, and that's a great place to go visit as well. Go down there.
Do you feel like you have to say that because of your?
No, I don't. Genuinely mean it. I genuinely mean it.
You like have some sort of contract that says if asked this question.
Must mention Verdant. Oh, have you tried our new yeast?
You should try it. No, honestly, you go down there, and it's not even just the brewery. Like the town of Falmouth is amazing. Lovely place.
I got to admit, Falmouth is
Verdant's
nice.
good.
My final one, I think, is going to be Ansbach Hop Day, because they just do
the stout
really
guys.
good standard beers. They'll do like a bitter, and it'll be really spot on, and they'll do a porter, and it'll be amazing. And
cream ale as well, or something, is it?
They've pulled me through lockdown. I got a couple of cases from them, and I was like, yes, this is the shit.
Yeah.
Hang on,
Nice.
two cases got you through a lockdown.
Okay, I bought 2 cases from them in the lockdown.
Okay. I'm going to say, dude, you need to drink more.
Well, what about this Nova Lager then? Because I don't think we've really kind of went into.
Can we wait until later? Because we want to get to the commercial break. I'm timing this sour really well for the commercial.
Best, best commercial breweries leads nicely into the commercial break, Andy.
Yeah,
segue, man.
Yeah. I'm just
Tricky. Are we gonna reintroduce the commercial break theme tune.
Well, I have done it on a couple of the last podcasts, but if there's
Excellent.
not a nice lead into it, it doesn't really make sense. Just have the music randomly kick in. So
Should we do
so,
the commercial
yeah,
break?
if somebody goes, let's take it to the commercial break, then I can put the little jingle in after.
Can I say it?
Yeah,
wait, because I actually got an email from somebody, a listener, believe it or not, in Australia, who said, and his only words, and I say this because he's Australian, he said, "Can you cunts please put the commercial break music back in, because I never know when to crack the can." Right? So shout out. His name's Dennis, top bloke. He sent me an email, get it put back in. So Tricky, should we take this to the commercial break?
Yeah, but Owen's got to say it now.
Sorry, go on.
You
cut that bit out. Cut that bit out.
Right,
should we take it to a commercial break?
There we go. Right, I
need we get a beer, right? You can
get a beer.
Yeah, get a beer.
Need another beer.
Get a beer.
Get a beer, Daniel.
I've got one. Exactly. Oh, so good.
I'm halfway through. I'm halfway through a hazy West Coast dipper. Except
this
that's not my commercial beer.
This is fucking special.
Have to neck it.
Right? I can taste coconut. I can taste pineapple. And for some reason, I can taste apricots, but I believe the apricots are supposed to
that's standard. That's standard Nipa juice.
No, it's a fucking sour, Andy.
Oh wow!
It's a pina colada sour.
Oh, that
It
is
a good one.
Now you're talking.
It's lovely. That's why I bought 4 cans of it. Yeah. Somebody's playing bingo. I think they've just got a line.
Oh. Talking
Right
of
then.
coconut. Talking of coconut.
I believe it's time to crack open the special cans. I'm going to keep it hidden so that the guys who are watching us live on YouTube can't see what the special cans are.
Right. So who's going first anyway? Because I think we'll.
Can we wait until he gets back? Because he might turn around and go, "Oh, we supplied the yeast for that beer."
Yeah, that was the question I wanted to ask Andrew. Actually,
I need a fresh. Yeah.
I need
I'll ask him in a minute.
Fresh glass for this one. It's going to have to be the vocation glass as well, isn't it? Really. Let me fire up the choo-choo train.
He's back.
Now Andrew's back. Who's going first?
Back.
Who's going first? Who really wants to go?
Me, I want to go.
Go on then.
I've got right. So
Andy.
So I ended up somehow with the Lord's Brewing Co. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's a brewery near Chris actually, Yorkshire.
The People's Republic of.
And it's the I don't know if any of you know the Stone the Crows guy. What's his name? He's a beer reviewer.
Real
forever.
Yeah,
been around forever.
So he's
the Welsh guy.
Aye, so he did a
Island or whatever.
He did a brew with John at the Lord's Brewing Co. And it is so it's like this biscuity. Is it an extra? Well, it's called Extra Stone Crow Bitter, so it's probably an extra bit. ESB. But it's like biscuit. It's just everything you want in a bitter sort of thing, like and a really nice sort of good body and that kind of so almost get like kind of raisiny thing, like the kind of dark like your dried fruits and stuff going on. And
you've got to say Stone the Crows. This is amazing, like he does on his video.
Stone the Crows.
Have you ever watched that video of his where the beer explodes? Have you ever watched that?
No.
He has a beer that's obviously like probably got an STA one infection in it. Anyway, he pops the top and it's just absolutely.
I think that might have been a homebrew actually, because I remember him saying like he doesn't really like want to do homebrews on
live
on his channel because the last time he did it was that bottle that exploded.
That's fine. We're going to run with that.
I think it wrecked his ceiling.
Yeah.
He ended up with I think there was about that much left in the bottle after everything exploded.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Andy, I was interrupting you.
So it's like super clear.
Looks nice.
Yeah, it's really nice. I was kind of like, I've never tried the Lord's Brewing Co. before, and yeah, it's really good. I got a case from them. I ended up on one of their live streams, John's live streams, and just chatting away with it, I think. And it was there was a couple other home brewers. I think I'd won a competition actually to go brew with them, and ended up, I was like, oh, I'll come on, because I've obviously got all the podcasting gear, and I stuck in an order as well just to see what all their stuff's like. But obviously, 4 or 5 weeks ago, I got COVID, and I've just been off beer, so it's been sitting in my fridge the whole time. And this is the first I've actually got to try some of the Lord's Brewing Co. And yeah, the bitter is very, very happy. So yeah.
So you're going to go and brew with them?
Yeah, hopefully.
That's what I took of that.
Yep, that's what. And it's with. Oh, who's the other boy? Sun Bear Brewing, Liam. He's going to be there as well. So I think it's going to be he offered that I could crash at his and then we would head over sort of thing. So I was like, stuff it, I'll enter last minute. And then obviously it goes the big wheel, you know, who are you going to choose? And I blooming won it. I was like, oh no. But no, I'm sure it'll be amazing when it happens, sort of thing. So
Mon the berries.
There's going to be a video from that one as well.
Oh, there has to be.
Yeah.
There has to be.
Awesome.
Jeez. Cool.
Nice stuff.
Who's
going next then?
I'll jump in next. So I have got a Polly's porter, cinnamon twirl. It's 6.9%. It's obviously flavored with cinnamon and vanilla. Doesn't really tell you much else about it on the can. So yeah, looks like a porter in the glass.
Oh.
If it looks like a porter and it smells like a porter.
And it walks
Probably
like a porter. It's probably a duck.
Might be a porter, yeah. Yeah, quite chocolatey, sweet. Definitely getting that vanilla and cinnamon on the nose as well.
Is it enjoyable?
I'm not convinced of that, to be honest.
Gutted.
It's I don't know. It's quite sweet.
50-50 thing.
It's sweet, but it's almost like it's lacking a bit of. I don't know, maybe a little bit of
some
body
sort
or
of,
something.
Is it some sort of Halloween beer with nutmeg and cinnamon and all that sort of thing?
Well, I must say I'm usually not a big fan of beers that have got sort of spices in them.
Yeah.
In any way, to be honest, and the cinnamon's not really the main issue with this, but it's just I don't know. Yeah, it just seems a bit thin.
I love those type of crumble beers with
and
cinnamon.
The thinness kind of makes the vanilla and the cinnamon seem a little bit artificial in it almost as well. So
you need some heft to carry it, don't you?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it's just lacking a bit of body for me. So yeah, that's not. It's out of the bruiser box I got from Polly's, and all the other ones have been really good so far. So yeah. Shame I picked that one for the commercial beer tonight, really. But
I'm pretty sure I'm getting my Polly's bruiser box pretty soon as well. Tricky.
Yeah,
so
let's move on. Hopefully you won't get that one because I think
don't have that in the box.
Yeah.
Shame.
The one I drank before, which was that one, was much better. So the Patternist was good.
Yeah, that's a good beer, that one.
Yeah.
Nice.
Owen, shall me and you just take a slight back seat so we can let Andrew talk about his beer?
Of course I can.
Oh, I mean,
go on, Andrew.
I'm still making my way through the Gloucesterbury box, so I've got the Gloucesterbury Lager,
Yay,
4.5%, and I note won the SIBA. How do I do it? Gold.
Oh wow,
so,
nice.
And I have to say, it's pretty good. It doesn't make a distinction on the style of lager, but it's more of a Helles than a Pilsner, I'd say. It's not very bitter, but it's pretty bright. It's probably not filtered, but it's pretty bright.
It's pretty clear.
Yeah. Tastes like a lager. Happy with it.
solid review.
That's one of the
It's
best
clear.
reviews
It's a
I'm a man
lager.
of few words.
It's all right.
No, this is a lager. It tastes like lager. It's clear. It's a lager.
Just go double thumbs up.
Is it
Hey.
is it Hersbrucker or Saz?
Does it even?
Can you not taste it?
And-
Come on.
Any
Oh, come on,
clues?
man. You should be able to taste the difference
Taste
between
that.
those two.
It just says it has hops in it.
Spice or is it get fruit? Is it get that sort of berry?
Is it hopped with hops?
Hersbrucker's normally quite berry, and Saz is real spice.
I'd say it's more on the berry than the spice.
Mhm.
There's a bit of DMS to it, but it's not.
Uh-huh.
It's not too much. There's a bit of that.
Yeah.
So perhaps suggesting maybe a Czech lager strain. That might be a stretch to draw that conclusion, but
Nah,
34
DMS is. No, they would definitely diamond.
With those nose notes, I would have to say probably more likely to be Styrian Goldings as the hop. To be fair,
Well, I
Sure.
can email them and ask. We'll find out.
can you let us know and we'll put it
I
up
will,
in the
yeah.
description for the podcast when it goes live?
Oh,
Yeah, sounds like a plan to me. Owen, hit it.
I'm drinking a beer from Three Hills Brewing. I bought a box of beer from them. Really enjoying a lot of their beers. Some of them pretty wacky. I had a peanut butter and jam sour
Ooh.
from them.
Good.
I'm not even sure what that's going to taste like.
I know.
Well, I don't know. Next time you have a sour, go and get a spoon of peanut butter, chuck it in, give it a stir.
I thought you were going to put it in your mouth while I was
close.
drinking it.
I
To
think
be
I
fair,
might have to blindfold myself whilst I drink it because I think that's going to look awful.
yeah, it definitely had like the bottom part of the can once you poured that in was pretty unsightly.
Flippy.
I'm not going to lie.
Sludgy.
But they really nailed like a good jam vibe to the beer, and that was really good. But I'm
Did
not
they have
sure.
a word with Mad Mick?
I'm not sure about
Can-
peanut sours just
It
as
has-
as a thing. Is
Nuts in beer is a bad thing, though, isn't it? Because of the fats. So really, you want to be using an extract when it comes to.
Also, putting that through your canning line and then saying, that sounds like a good way of giving somebody a nut allergy.
That's true. Yeah.
possibly.
Yeah.
I'm probably not getting into that level. I'm just talking about should you have peanut in a sour, peanut in a stout?
Yeah.
Give it to me any day. Peanut in a sour, maybe not. Anyway,
Yeah, I just can't even fathom the idea of that flavour combination. To be honest, it's not.
I'll
It's
send
quite
you. I'll send you
peanut
a
sour.
can.
It's the kind of thing you'd have on like soy sauce and vinegar and noodles. That's kind of peanutty.
Satay.
Yeah, actually, that probably helps.
But
me
it's
to
the whole.
imagine it.
Peanut
gonna
butter
work
Still
and
not
jelly
something I want in
sandwiches.
beer though.
Is it
Maybe
not the
what-
American sandwich thing? The peanut butter and jelly.
PBJ.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah,
that's not
but that's
sour,
not
is it?
So
sour,
good.
though, is it? It's not sour.
I know, but it's just.
When
I'm
the
not being funny.
debate's not about whether peanut butter and jam sandwiches are good or not, Andy.
They
That's
are.
not what we're talking about. Everyone agrees on that.
Everyone
needs to
It's
try
whether
that.
it should exist in a sour liquid form to drink. Is
There
it?
is-
Probably
there
not.
is,
Matter.
as a regular consumer of peanut butter and jam sandwiches, okay, I can tell you from good experience that there is a reason it is made with strawberry jam, right, and not with raspberry. And that's because raspberry jam, even though there's a lot of sugar in it, it's still too sour and it doesn't bloody work. Whereas strawberries are really sweet and it works. Blackcurrant, you can just about get away with, right? Apricots are no-no. Damson works, but raspberry, no.
Marmalade,
Get
Lemon
out,
curd.
go and wash your face, and then
lemon
jump in the
curd.
tea.
I'm with
Oh my
Andrew.
God.
You're all wrong. You're all wrong.
Wait, see.
Oh my
Good.
God, no. No,
Anyway,
no.
I'm on
That
the-
is akin to using Bisto gravy granules.
Right, we're not talking about gravy. All right, I'm
Yeah,
drawing
okay.
the fucking line.
Yeah.
We're not
Yorkshire.
talking about
I think
gravy
we should.
again.
We're not going down that rabbit hole
No.
again.
That's
Yeah.
Been there many times.
We
Yeah,
don't want to talk about gravy.
Don't encourage me.
Keep the drippings.
Right.
We'll be on to PC versus Apple next.
Yeah. Who's
PC
left
wins.
anyway? Who's
Me.
got
I'm
there?
still going. I haven't even started my
Sorry,
review yet.
Owen. Go on,
Oh,
mate.
sorry.
One was talking about his previous beer he drank.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You
I'm
shaft
just-
all over Owen there.
Anyway, right. I'm on the dipper train.
Yes.
Hey!
This is the second double IPA. It's a double IPA. It's called Creation of a Peaceful State from Three Hills Brewing, and it is Cryo Sabro, Cryo Laurel, and Cashmere. And it contains water, barley, hops, and yeast.
There you go.
Breaking news.
Funnily enough.
And yeah, it's a big beer. It's big, heavy, but it's fluffy. It's got a nice kind of real proper softness to it. So I think they've nailed the water profile in there. I don't know what yeast they would have been using, but I'd imagine
Lallemand.
something with a fair bit of glycerol in there. What you tend to get on the beer is just a lot of Sabro. You're getting that pretty big, heavy hit of coconut and
Tropical
weirdness that you just get from Sabro.
Yeah, I do like it.
And I tend to perceive Sabro in quite a savoury way.
I get creamy.
Yeah, creamy. Savoury, sagey ness, but it's just about tolerable in this beer. I'm kind of enjoying it so far. I'm not sure I'm going to be enjoying it 2/3 of the way in.
Is it quite orange, or is it just a contrast from your on-air light? Can't tell.
No, it is quite orangey. Definitely on the orange side over the yellow side, but there you go.
Yeah.
Give you a bit of a.
But it's quite big beer.
It is a big beer.
Tends to go like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's got kind of pink grapefruit vibes going on. There's enough bitterness to carry it. It's not too cloying.
Is that cashmere that gives pink grapefruit?
It could be that. So I think cashmere. I don't know about laurel. I think laurel. I don't know much about laurel.
It's quite floral. It's funny because all these hops that you're mentioning, most of them didn't exist when I was brewing, but laurel did. I tried it when it was a trial variety, and it was quite kind of, I don't know, rose, floral, kind of. It was nice, but it's not in your face at all.
Yeah, I would get that, and maybe that's what's sort of pushing that Sabro more into the sagey territory over the coconut territory. But I think that pink grapefruit thing just carries it through at the end to be just like enough to be a bit fruity as opposed to just out and out odd. It's nice. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm done now, so I've been talking for the best part of like 20 minutes probably.
And it's Chris's turn, and he's disappeared.
Yeah, what happened to Chris?
He's left.
Where's he gone?
Hedgehogs might be having sex outside.
Probably some random animal humping on his shed roof that he had to go and shoot.
The backstory of that, Andrew, is he did have, or maybe still has, a couple of hedgehogs that like to procreate. Oh no.
No, it's better.
They're the real stars of the podcast.
Can I just say, the wife's just brought me food.
No way.
Buffalo chicken
It's a hedgehog.
fries.
Yeah.
I'll eat them in a moment.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys. The wife decided to bring me dinner. So yeah,
Outrageous.
I apologize. Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay, get on with it.
So, for those of you who've not seen it, Vocation do a naughty and nice selection box of beers. Now, I've only had one of them. Based on this one, go to Vocation's website and fucking buy them. Okay? It is. I decided to go with naughty and nice, which is the, as it says on the back, milk chocolate stout with light whipped vanilla nougat flavor. It's out of this world. Basically, this is a Milky Way imperial stout.
Oh, that sounds so good.
Go and buy it.
Yeah.
Stop listening to this shit. Go and buy it. Pause the podcast. Go and buy it. Go buy it now.
How much was it, Chris?
30 something quid.
Okay.
I ended up putting 4 cans of
the one you were drinking earlier. Yeah.
This.
Your sour.
The pina colada sour. I ended up putting 4 cans of this in. because I've had one of those before. Stunning beer, great beer.
Yeah.
This is out of this world. It is.
I've got bad news for our listeners. It's sold out already.
Oh,
dear.
dum dum dum.
Should have got on it. This is literal liquid Milky Way. It's beautiful.
That's what you want.
It's really chocolatey. It's really, really creamy. So they've hit the lactose bang on. The nougat flavor comes through. There's loads of vanilla, which I've never managed to get in a beer. I love it.
You need a Milky Way just to dunk in it.
I do, mate.
imagine.
I do. This is absolutely stunning.
Oh, you could do that thing. I'm not sure if it'll work with the Milky Way, but you bite either end off and use
then
it as a
stick it
straw.
Yeah.
Oh,
That definitely
penguins-
wouldn't work with
That would be hard work with a Milky Way.
oh, this is spectacular. You can
What,
do
penguin?
it with
Penguin.
Do you remember when Cadbury's used to have? They had the twirl, and they
Yes.
also had the one called Galaxy released one called the Spira.
Yep.
The
No.
Spira you could drink a milkshake through. This is phenomenal, right?
So happy.
There's a load of body. It's not hefty, but it's thick, and it's creamy, and it's vanilla-y, and it's super chocolatey, and it's not that dark, crappy chocolate that you think is going to stop you from going for a shit. It's like a milk chocolate that's really kind of.
It's not something I've experienced.
No,
before.
never.
You've not heard-
It's like,
okay,
what?
so there's a compound in chocolate that if you're susceptible to it, it's part
Which
of
Chris
the.
is.
I think it's theobromine. No, not me, the wife.
All right.
With theobromine, I think it's theobromine. I might be wrong. Basically, it paralyzes your bowels, so your bowel doesn't move very well anymore. So you end up really constipated, and then when it clears, you end up with the, cow on rapeseed kind of thing. This,
Biochemistry.
Tip for any long haul flyers.
I'm pissed off that this is out of stock. So I was going to order another box without telling the wife. This is beautiful, and
There
it
you go.
comes with
Oh, a glass.
with a vocation glasses. Oh my god, this is amazing. Amazing.
Good.
Excellent.
Oh, shut up.
We learned so much during that review.
I'm
it's
just
amazing.
Googling theobromine now.
Yeah.
As you well should. Right, you guys crack on. I'm going to eat some food.
Let's get back into the questions, shall we?
Yeah, the novel lager. Can we get into that?
No, I'm reading about theobromine.
Oh dear.
Andrew's out of action for the next
Yeah.
2
I know.
Yeah, that's it. He's gone. So we've got
So
a question
Chris.
in the chat that I'll do now just to get
Very
out of the way.
nice.
So Hoddy has asked if thoughts on co-pitching dry yeast, upsides, downsides, things to look out for when you go down that route with Lallemand yeast, such as if you wanted to combine a Pilsner and a Saison, which he's given as an example. I was snooping around on the Lallemand website, and I think I did see something about co-pitching, which said one of the plus points of dry yeast is that you can do that quite easily, because obviously you can weigh it out and work to an exact balance or ratio between the yeast. So do you want to expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah,
maybe?
I mean, there's certainly no reason not to do it. It's just trying to take one characteristic from one strain and one characteristic from another, and trying to amp one up while avoiding the downsides for another. So I mean, maybe a good example might be, for instance, the London and the Windsor strains are quite poor attenuators. So if you wanted to get a similar character but increase the attenuation, you might pitch that and, let's say, like a clean tasting strain like Nottingham or BOI at the same time, and then you'd benefit from the fruity flavour and the increased attenuation. Lager and Saison is a bit more out there, but you could certainly, let's say you want to have a very high attenuation lager, maybe you would do like an initial lager fermentation and then kind of pitch the Saison yeast maybe halfway through or something. You don't want to get too much in the way of Saison flavour in there, and it would maybe dry it out a lot. There's probably easier ways of achieving a similar effect in that particular example.
So I guess it's a bit of trial and error, working on ratio of the pitch, but also potentially timing of when it goes in and and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I mean, when I worked at Darkside, you will laugh at this, we used 3 strains, all co-pitched at the same time, all of which were quite neutral. It was a bit of a
Right.
weird one. So we used to
Okay.
use 1/3 Nottingham, 1/3 04, 1/3 05. And I think the rationale actually was that if one of them didn't work very well, then there'd be other strains there which would take over. It was a bit of a weird. I was never allowed to change it because the management were very worried about things changing after Mark
Yeah.
left. They didn't want any of the beers to change, and I was like, "This is stupid. Why are we doing this?" And they were like, "No, you can't change it." So we went with it. And to be honest with you, the beers were very nice. It was just a bit of a strange thing to do.
Yeah.
Like there was no obvious reason for it. So yeah, you can play around with co-pitching, and it works very well. It's just trying to say what you want in particular from that strain and why you want to co-pitch it. There's got to be a reason for it.
That's cool.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Is there any downsides, Andrew, to co-pitching yeasts?
Not really. Unless there's probably there's pitfalls that you could kind of have. So there's things that you could maybe pitch together that wouldn't be very compatible. For instance, if you pitched like a champagne strain at the same time as an ale strain, the champagne strain probably only ferments glucose and maltose, and is killer positive. So if you pitch it at the same time as the standard ale strain, then it's probably not going to ferment all that well, but it's also going to start to kill the strain that is fermenting well. So there's things that you could do that probably wouldn't be beneficial. But for the most part, if you're just pitching ale strains together, there isn't really a downside to it.
So when you consider pitch rate, can you literally just make up your target pitch rate with as many strains as you would
Yeah,
want?
you could. Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard to decide what flavor they're going to produce, but
like putting that aside, it's just like from a pure pitch rate perspective, it doesn't care if it's hanging out with its different gang.
I mean, you could maybe use it to say tone down a strain. So let's say you have a strain that's really flavor active and you don't want it to produce quite as much. Then you could say, okay, well, I'm going to pitch it with another strain that's going to be quite neutral, and then that might take the edge off it. So you can use it for things like that.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. That's an interesting thought. Did you like how sort of, in my mind, a personified yeast just as gangs? And for the most part, brewing strains play together quite nicely. So you get strains that they call them killer, right? So they'll produce proteins that will, for instance, punch the holes in walls of other yeast strains and therefore kill them. It's quite common in wine for strains to do that, but it's pretty rare in brewing. So most brewing strains can play together quite nicely. They're friendly.
Just out of pure curiosity, whilst I'm talking about the low ABV thing that I'm currently on, can you recommend 2 strains that I can pitch together that one's going to give me, like good hop emphasis, but also at the same time is going to give me a low kind of, I want low attenuation, and I want, to a certain extent, I want high flocculation. Basically, I'm looking for the perfect yeast, one that doesn't produce too much alcohol, clears quite quick, but also emphasizes the hop characteristics of the beer. Because whilst I'm trying to produce a low ABV beer, I don't want a boring low ABV beer. Now, I thought about using Windsor and London together. I also thought about maybe using something like SO4 and a kind of a quarter pitch of Verdant.
Yeah, I mean, so what we recommend for low ABV, not going into what might come out in future, but what we recommend for low ABV at the moment is
what's
Windsor.
coming out in the future.
We're looking at options, but
we got you on for this entire reason, fella. I'm trying to produce a low ABV. Hook me up, dude.
So Windsor and Lallemand are what we recommend in the first instance. That's because they don't ferment maltotrios, right? So they leave behind probably a third of wort sugars, just off the back. So they'll leave behind the maltotriers. They'll only ferment the glucose and the maltose. So you automatically get quite low attenuation with them, even in a standard wort. But if you're going to go to using a high temperature technique in mashing, then you can get even lower attenuation. So you can get to a point that you can get probably like 40% attenuation using Windsor in London at very high temperatures. Windsor is the one I tend to recommend because it has quite a high beta glucosidase activity, which is a type of biotransformation. So it releases quite good hop aromas. London, which I think is the one you've used, right, isn't quite as strong, and the ester character it produces during fermentation is more kind of citrusy, kind of orange clementines rather than more tropical
into the brew. Yeah.
Whereas the Windsor is more of a New England kind of style flavor. In fact, people have used it instead of the New England yeast in the past because it's cheaper. So that's the one that we kind of recommend at the moment. We did a lot of work on mashing and how to reduce your attenuation in that way, and what kind of gravities to start at and stuff. And this was mostly aimed at beers that were 0.5 or slightly higher. You're getting a 2.5, so you wouldn't need to go quite to this level. But we were doing 1026, 1027, 6.5 Plato initial starting gravity, but then mashing it like 80.
I mean, that's a bit much.
It's hot, yeah. It's very hot.
I did 72.
And that will probably work for 2.5%, but if you're trying to get 0.5%, that's going to be too low. You're going to get too much in the way of maltose production. So the rationale behind hop mashing is that you essentially kill off the beta amylase enzyme, which is creating maltose.
And you're saying that Windsor produces some beta amylase?
No. So this is just happening in mashing. What Windsor doesn't do, it doesn't ferment maltotriose, which is 3 glucose units fixed together. Right. So it will ferment glucose and it will ferment maltose, which is the majority of your wort sugars, but maltotriose is quite a big proportion of the wort sugars, and it won't ferment that.
Right.
Which is
so
why
I was right to look at Windsor then.
Windsor in London, yeah, that's the ones I would go for. I mean, a lot of the specialist strains for low alcohol production that are out there, they'll only ferment glucose, which if you only ferment glucose, that's about 10 to 15% of the wort sugars. So it doesn't produce much alcohol, right?
So you could probably get down to like a 1.2% beer quite easily.
Very easily, yeah, and quite easily to go to 0.5 actually as well.
I'm gonna need your email address.
The issue with that is, right, if you're only fermenting 15% of the glucose and you're not doing anything else, then you're still going to have loads of maltose and you're going to end up with a sweet beer. So it's going to taste sweet. So you need to do other things. Low alcohol brewing is like you have to look at every part. You can't just shove some yeast in some wort and make it.
So going from my particular, I realize that we're talking about yeast and everything, but going purely from my standpoint of wanting a beer around about 2.5, starting at roughly, I think I haven't fired it up because I daren't. I think I started at around about 1032. I think that was my last brew. Maybe 1030, 1032, something like that. And I ended up quite high. I ended up at, I think it was 1014.
Okay.
Maybe 1012, can't remember. It was one of the two. So Windsor, maybe a bit of London, but I wanted that good hop attenuation, which is, so you recommend Windsor for that?
Yeah, definitely.
Windsor gives me the good hop attenuation.
It gives more. There's more flavor to it.
Okay, so Windsor for the hop attenuation, mash at 72, hope to finish around about 1013, 1014, and I'm roughly at 2.4% then, aren't I?
Yes.
Yeah. That works. It's okay.
Without doing the math in my head, yes.
Now there was a reason why I bought the Windsor. It's because my son likes to make a brown ale. He's 8. He doesn't drink it. He just likes to make it. Clarification for legal purposes. And basically, he likes the way that the Windsor yeast works. The reason why I bought the Windsor.
Can he write us a testimonial?
I'm sure he could. He's 8 though. It wouldn't be legible.
That's why I want it.
The whole kind of the way in which it's kind of working I'm going to use Windsor on the next batch, and we're going to see where we go from there. Version 4 is in the pipeline, people.
Andrew, there's a question from the chat.
Okay.
Are you NDA'd for life in regards to Dark Star recipes? Hashtag Hophead.
And Revelation as well,
any
apparently.
tips you might like to share on
Hophead. I could talk about Hophead.
How to get near that recipe from a homebrew.
So it used to be 100% Cascade, and I think they switched in like 1/3 Amarillo at one point because the Cascade crop wasn't very exciting. The bitterness is through the roof, so it's like 50 IBU in a 3.8.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, it's really, really bitter, really bitter, too bitter sometimes. And then 3 yeasts. So we did 05, 04, and
A
Nottingham.
magic 3 yeast combination.
Oh.
Yeah, and then the water was pretty heavy on the sulfate.
Just to really punch that bitterness.
Yeah, it's bitter.
Yeah, in your face.
It's not subtle. No, and it wasn't. Nice beer though, but yeah, it's not subtle. So that a lot of their beers were very bitter. The APA that we did was 4.8%, I think, and that was 60 IBU, and that was, for me, that was unbalanced. I thought it was too much, but
yeah.
We've had a few questions relating to pitching rates and how that affects the beer, but also in terms of dried yeast on a homebrew scale. I mean, does it vary based on the strains that you have in terms of the recommended pitching rates, and is there a general rule of thumb? And also another question that was asked is, can pitching rate influence the sort of attenuation and final gravity as well of the beer at the end? So
it can, but that's not something you want to happen, right? So if you underpitch, then you can end up with a beer that doesn't attenuate correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be like under attenuated. But then because there's still quite a lot of fermentable sugar there at the end of that fermentation, when then you put it into a bottle or like a keg or whatever, if you've got some live yeast there, it's probably still going to chug away because there's still something for it to ferment. So I absolutely would not use that as a control mechanism for fermentation. It's not a good way of doing it. It's an invitation to get exploding bottles. So I wouldn't go down that route. What was the rest of the question? I forget already. But
just about pitching rates generally, sort of in terms of like recommended levels. Is there a sort of generic pitching rate, or does it change depending on the actual strain that you're using?
So both. I mean, we have a calculator on our website which incorporates the differences between the different strains. So we do have like general recommendations, which are 0.5 gram a liter or 500 grams. 50 grams a hectoliter, and that changes to 1 gram a liter or 100 grams a hectoliter about when you get to about 5 or 6%. So the stronger the beer, the more yeast that you require, and it's slightly arbitrary with the dried yeast. So you're doing it in defined weights, and it does vary per strain, and that's because strains will grow to different cell densities in our propagation process. So some cells are really good at being propagated and grow to very high cell densities. So there's a lot of them in a unit of weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some will grow to a lower cell density, so there's less of them in that unit weight. So in order to correct for that, if you've got a strain that's particularly bad at growing, you pitch more of it. And if you've got a strain that's particularly good at growing, you can grow less of it. For instance, things like Nottingham and Verdant and Voss grow really, really well, and you don't need a great deal of them compared with things like the Kolsch strain and the New England strain and the Lager strain, which grow to lower cell density, so you need a higher bit rate for those.
Okay, so even with some of the ale strains, it's probably worth considering sort of like 2 packs rather than one. Is I guess what we're saying there.
Yeah, definitely, and it does depend on the strain. But the more fragile strains that don't like growing so much, you'd probably better to go with 2 packs and on the stronger ones with those.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that covers pretty much all of that question. What else have we got to talk about?
Could we change the subject slightly?
You're muted, Owen.
Or you're quiet.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'll sort that I just wanted to quickly change the subject onto the Philly yeast
Nice,
strain,
yeah.
because I think that deserves a section in the conversation. I think it's really interesting. What's your view in terms of what's the research saying around pitching rate? Because from my experience, Andrew, I've had people anecdotally say they'll pitch 1 pack of yeast of Philly yeast, and they'll get a very long fermentation. Results reasonably consistent, but the process takes longer. I've always double pitched with the Philly yeast strain and tended to find just a normal regular fermentation period. If you found any observations from the research that Lallemand had done?
Yeah, if you pitch on the lower side, it is a very long fermentation, which, from a commercial brewery's perspective, less so from a homebrew side, is a big deal because they're trying to get product out the door, right? So if it takes twice as long to ferment, that is actually a problem. In all likelihood, if you pitch on the lower side on the homebrew scale and you don't mind waiting it'll probably get there eventually. With the caveat that the attenuation could be slightly lower because you've done a lower pitch rate and the cells aren't as healthy towards the end of the fermentation, and it is sluggish anyway. With the Philly, probably the biggest thing is temperature. So when we first launched it, we were suggesting people pitch between 20 and 25 degrees. And that was quite long. So you'd probably be looking at fermentation between 10 and 14 days, which for an ale, well, it's not an ale strain, which for a strain that isn't a lager strain is long. Since then, we've been talking more about 25 to 27 degrees. And if you do that, you get like a 5 to 6 day fermentation. You get quick souring. And particularly in a commercial brewery, that's of benefit because it means they get the beer out the door faster. But even on the homebrew side, if you've got a very long, sluggish fermentation, there's more opportunity for maybe wild yeast infection and things like that to get in. So actually, it's better to have a short fermentation, and there isn't a great deal of benefit to a long one. So, you could go on the lower side, but I'd probably go on the high side and just make sure that it gets done nice and quickly. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so from a higher fermentation temperature, being this actually isn't an ale yeast strain, you're not going to risk any unusual flavors or whatever.
Very clean. It is a very clean strain. Even at 25 to 27 degrees, it's clean.
Has the research played with pushing it to Kvike temperatures, 30, 35?
I think we have, yeah, and I don't think it liked it very much.
Oh, okay.
So I think I don't know what the maximum temperature is, but I think out of Kvike's temperatures, I don't think it performs very well at all. So I'd probably avoid doing that.
That's a really, really good piece of advice. That actually you can save yourself a little bit of money. Sorry, Andrew, that's probably a bad piece of advice for your bottom line, but you can pitch 1 pack, but ferment at 27, and you're likely then to not get 2 weeks.
It's exactly what I'll do. And I only bought 1 packet, and then I found out from yourself that it makes sense to do a double pitch, and then I was like, "Oh, you're joking!" So 27.
And it'll get through it. It will.
Quick add-on question out of the chat with the Philly yeast: does adding glucose help with extra souring?
It does, yeah, it does. So the mechanism of souring is only from glucose, right? So after that glucose is gone, that yeast will switch into alcoholic fermentation, and it will ferment maltose and maltodrise into alcohol, which is pretty unusual for a Lallemand species, which is the type of yeast that it is. So yeah, I'm upping that glucose concentration either with an addition to the kettle. Or some sort of puree into the fermenter will actually help with souring and acidity.
Couple of Lucozade tablets.
Sure, yeah.
Just a bottle of Lucozade, why not? Bottle of Iron Brew.
I was planning on producing a sour. I've got 3 packs of Philly sour in the fridge, literally next to me.
Yep.
If I wanted to produce a sour at around about 3.5%, roughly what percentage? I like lower ABV beers. I like to be able to have 5 instead of 1.
Yeah.
If I was to add glucose to that particular brew, and I have glucose in a box somewhere in this shed. I'm going to wave around like an air traffic controller. I'm not entirely sure where it is, but I do have a big bag of glucose. Yeah, that's the
I'm
one.
pretty sure those guys aren't the air traffic controllers, FYI.
Okay, dudes
yeah.
with big paddles that point shit in the direction. Roughly how much glucose should I be adding? I want a decent sour. I want roughly, 3.5%, 4%, something like that.
I think we normally say about 2%. Add about 2%.
So about 2% glucose should get me to the point of having a decent soured beer.
Yeah.
And then I can just ferment as normal. Is it
Well,
a big
it will.
attenuator or?
I mean, it will ferment and attenuate like a standard ale yeast. So somewhere in the high 70s is pretty standard on the attenuation front. So yeah,
Right, so-
you could just throw it in like a standard yeast as long as the temperature is
So
correct.
1034 with like 2% glucose should get me around about 3%, 3.5% with a decent sour.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sold. I knew it was good having you on. Yeah, that works for me.
Or you could
Now-
kettle sour, if you wanted to.
No, Owen is the king of passion fruit kettle sours. He literally made the beer that got me into sour beers.
Yeah,
It was so
totally
good. I went live on Facebook.
I converted him,
Yeah.
Andrew. Converted him.
That was.
How do you keep it
What was
warm
that?
for the souring process at home?
Well, I made it in a B80, so I think I just kept the PID on, and
Okay.
effectively, I think it's like what was it, about 40 degrees, something like that.
Yeah,
From
35-ish.
memory, 35, somewhere between 35 and 40. And I just, I think I put the lid on. I CO2 blasted it, put the lid on, and saran wrapped it.
Was that called like your 4-fruit sour thing or something? What was that?
No, that was with Philly. That was the triple fruit goza.
Oh,
That was a banger as well, to be
good.
fair.
Yeah.
I did that with
Andy.
Philly.
The original kettle soured passion fruit sour was where it was at, mate.
Well,
That
I
was-
actually used sour pitch. This was the days before Philly, and it's the only time I've ever done a kettle sour, and it came out really well. It was good.
It was a banger. Don't sell yourself short, Owen.
It was a real puckering sour though, wasn't it? It was like
It was a good one.
it was one sip and every bit of your saliva had been sort of sucked out of like a
Chris had one bottle.
vacuum of space.
On it had a keg.
Yeah, it was good. It was nice. I forgot my question now. Philly yeast. So I've heard rumors you can't reuse it, or can you make a starter with it?
So in both cases, you probably can, right? The issue is because it's a slow fermenter compared with a Saccharomyces strain. If you get any contamination in there, it gets out competed quite quickly, and that's not to say necessarily that it won't be the dominant strain in there, because it might well be, but it means that the contaminating strain will compete with the Philly sour for the glucose, and therefore you won't see a souring. So if, let's say, you've propagated it and you've got a trace contamination with the Saccharomyces yeast, at that point at the start of fermentation, there's lots of glucose available. That Philly's there going, man, I'm a bit sluggish, I'm a Philly sour yeast, and the Saccharomyces is like, give me that glucose right now. And it basically takes the glucose, and you don't see as much souring as you would otherwise. So it can be a problem. The same with reuse, like in a commercial brewery environment, it's very hard to make things commercially sterile. So the likelihood is, if you're repitching it serially, you will actually get a bit of contamination from a Saccharomyces, probably your own house brewing yeast in there at some stage. And then while you might still have Philly available within that slurry that you've collected, it's probably still there in great numbers. You might have enough Saccharomyces there that it starts to affect the acid production. So
Yeah,
it's not so that you couldn't do it, but it's like
That's
it might
why
be a bit
not.
tricky.
I've actually proven this because I made a beer, pitched it onto a Philly yeast cake, but co-pitched it with a sack yeast. As soon as it went into the fermenter, it didn't really get any souring at all.
That's why.
which on reflection,
It's good to know we're right.
Yeah, no, you just jogged my memory.
Real world
So
application.
it sort of just really validated your expert opinion, Andrew.
Fantastic.
So well done. You know your stuff. Congratulations. You passed my
Good job.
test.
Good job.
I thought I'd
Who's a
just add
biochemist?
that little.
You know what I'm saying?
I thought I'd add that little story. You jogged my memory.
That's funny.
Okay. I want to jump into
shut
this
up.
next question. Don't shut up, Owen. We love you. Okay, you made a passion fruit sour and it was fucking awesome. Right. I want to jump into this next point. It's a bit of a break from what we've been talking about because I'm aware of the time and everything. So, yeast equivalents. All right. Now we all know that US05 and Bry 97 are basically the same shit. We also know that 3470 and Diamond are basically the same shit. So why are they different?
Oh, it's a tough one. So actually, BOY and 05 are genetically quite different. So actually, they're not the same.
So they diverse earlier within the mutation tree.
So a lot of people will talk about those as the like Chico strain. So are they from different sources originally, or
I think they are. So I believe, and don't quote me on this, I'm going to say it, but don't quote me on it. I believe BRY was deposited with the Lallemand yeast culture collection by Ballantyne's Brewery, which is actually on the east coast of the States.
Okay, interesting.
And then I think it was revived by a brewery on the west coast later. And BRY 97 is the dried version of BRY 96, which was the one that was originally deposited. But it is genetically quite distinct from 05, albeit they have similar flavor profiles. On the lager side of things, lager yeasts actually aren't that diverse, right? So lager yeast has probably been around 200, 300 years. And it's a hybrid. It's a different species between ale yeast and lager yeast. So lager yeast, Saccharomyces pastorianus, is derived from a wild yeast called Saccharomyces eubayanus and Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which at some point have undergone a hybridization event to create this new strain. And that only happened probably 300 years ago, maybe a little bit longer ago than that.
I love the fact that you use hybridization instead of mutation. Is that to not scare people?
No, because it actually is hybridization. They've bred. It's not a mutation. They've bred together.
Oh, right. It's not a point mutation. It's literally somebody fucked a monkey.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
in the scenario.
And it's actually like one of the things that's weird about it is that
this is COVID-19 all in yeast. That's what this is. Somebody fucked a bat.
It's not beating the monkey, it's fucking the monkey.
You're not spanking it, you're literally fucking it. And that's where the issue occurs.
Oh dear.
So people don't really understand where this happened, right? So that yeast, the wild ancestor of that lager yeast, has been found in Tibet and Patagonia and Wisconsin.
Jesus
and I
Christ.
think in Australia, like,
all the
but
places.
never in Europe, which is where lager yeast are raised. So, like, how did it get there? And this strain is always associated with oak trees and trees, so it's thought that it happened in a barrel somewhere in Europe.
Aliens. I think it's probably aliens.
Wasps. It's always fucking wasps.
Happened in a barrel somewhere in Europe.
Anyway, right. So, yeah,
I'm sticking to my alien theory. It's not
so the yeast, the lager yeasts aren't very diverse. Like they haven't diverged genetically very much. So if you look at something like 3470 and Diamond together, not in a lot of depth, then actually they look genetically identical. The differences arise when you look at microsatellite DNA and things like that, and you see very slight differences, which do make slight flavor differences as well. So, you know, there's actually quite a lot of lager yeasts out there, and probably in an initial screen, they probably all look quite similar. But if you look in a bit more depth, you see that there are differences. And while genetically they're not making a great deal of difference on a phenotypic level, they are having quite a big difference, and they're causing different flavors. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think the big difference for me in terms of observation, anecdotally, between 3470 and Diamond is flocculation.
Yeah, flocculation is the big difference for me with those
Absolutely.
No, diamond just
Absolutely.
flocculates way easier than 3470.
two. I might be dropping a minute here, but when I was speaking to your colleague Kofi at BrewCon, he kind of told me that the source yeast for those two was essentially the Weihenstephaner lager strain. So he was kind of saying that essentially from the same
3470
source.
is the Weihenstephan lager strain, yeah. So that's
So
the kind of
is that not the
original.
case for Diamond, or
So Diamond's actually licensed from the Diamonds Academy, which is a brewing yeast bank and school in Munich, but
okay?
it's not the same strain, but genetically very similar.
Right.
So
okay.
what you're saying is lager yeast are all pretty much of a muchness with subtle differences.
For the most part, yes. So we talked about this hybridization event, right? It probably happened either once or twice, or there was like a second hybridization event further down the road. So there's two families of lager yeast. There's type 1 and type 2. Most lager yeasts in the world that are used for brewing are type 2 lager yeasts, and they contain roughly 50% ale genome and 50% of this wild yeast genome. The original Carlsberg lager yeast was a type 1 lager yeast, and that probably had 2/3 of wild yeast and 1/3 of Saccharomyces.
Right.
And it meant it wasn't quite as good at brewing, but it forms this distinct lager yeast family, which almost nobody uses for anything. So it's academically interesting, and there's probably a few breweries that use it commercially.
Remember Carlsberg trying to revive that?
I don't know. So I don't know what Carlsberg used for brewing, whether it's a type 2 or a type 1. If it's a type 1, they probably do quite a lot of stuff to make it work well.
Remember, there was a video and they basically brought back the original yeast, and it was so slow that when they were trying to build it up and stuff, I think it was some sort of anniversary brew that they were doing, and they went back to the original, and it was like when they were trying to build it up in their tanks, it was just a total nightmare to actually, like so bad.
Did you ever try the H41? Was Heineken did that? H41 uses the original wild yeast parent of lager yeast for brewing, and it's a weird yeast because it's POF positive, so it creates that kind of Belgian character to it. But it also doesn't really ferment maltodries very well, and it's quite cryo tolerant, so it likes the cold. But I don't know how they did that. It must have been a weird process that they tried. So yeah,
See, this is the part of the podcast where we're delving deep into random shit right now. Okay, this is for the true geeks who listen to the podcast. Most people are pissed at this point, so it's interesting for me because I did biochemistry and toxicology when I was at university. So for me, it's quite interesting to delve into these slight genetic differences, the hybridization events, the point mutations.
No, it's good.
Something which is cold tolerant, something which isn't, something.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing that what you've just said is like the 50-50 split on the genome between the ale and the lager.
Oh, the wild. Yeah.
That probably explains why there's certain lagers or certain lager strains that you can ferment warmer, but under pressure to kind of suppress those esters and end up with something which is quite clean, like 3470. I fermented a beer with 3470, which I fermented at 21 degrees under 15 psi, and it tasted like I'd fermented it with Munich.
Yeah, I mean
that's quite interesting
really.
to me.
Yeah, I mean the pressure thing's interesting because pressure is. I mean the reason that it has an effect is because you get higher CO2, like dissolved CO2 in the wort, and a lot of the reactions within yeast that create esters are decarboxylation reactions.
Absolutely.
So if you've got a very high concentration of CO2, then those reactions don't happen to the same degree. The equilibrium is upset.
Temperature and pressure is the whole chemistry thing.
And then you get less in the way of flavor production, which is why that high pressure thing works. At the same time, those reactions are fairly critical to yeast cell growth. So if you go too high on the pressure, then you get really poor attenuation because the yeast don't like it very much.
Is it not quite a big problem with commercial brewers, like when they've got the big tanks, like the big macro brewers or whatever? Do they not have to worry about head pressure and stuff like that?
I mean, the hydrostatic pressure there is high, but actually they're looking probably for less in the way of flavor production anyway. So that's probably
good.
I was
in
going
many
to say, have
respects
you
beneficial.
tasted
Yeah.
Carl's
Yeah.
There's no fucking flavour in that beer.
So yeah, it probably helps, but then at the same time, they need to have a yeast that can withstand that and be able to grow and ferment. So yeah, I don't know if they have problems with it, but it certainly would. I mean, if they're going from one plant to another and they have different vessel geometries, then it's going to change the flavor production of the strain, and that could be a problem if you're trying to maintain brand integrity.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump on. I'm aware of the time. So, what are the key factors for a successful fermentation then? Are we talking the standards of vitality, pitch rate, and nutrients, or are we talking, is there anything else that we need to do?
I mean, for me, it's viable yeast and enough of it. So that's
Pitch
probably
rate.
the biggest. Yeah,
Yeah.
pitch rate. Yeah, pitch rate to a lesser degree temperature, but not many people are going to be pitching at the wrong temperatures unless they're real noobs. Don't pitch your ale yeast at 9 degrees. It won't work.
Dude sounds
Well.
like he's a gamer too. Fucking noobs.
That's probably
with
No,
you.
I mean,
Half
it's
the
one of, I mean,
listeners.
enough yeast cells is probably the biggest. Yeast nutrient is a funny one because a lot of people will like swear by it, but in a standard brewery wort, there should be enough nutrient there anyway, right? There should be enough nitrogen from your malt. There should be enough kind of vitamins and minerals from your malt. It shouldn't actually be a problem. It's only when you start to get to the really big beers and the really strong beers that starts to become a limitation. Particularly on the like really strong beers, it's good to have some sort of zinc there. And that's because zinc stabilizes the alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. So if you get into really high levels, the yeast needs that within the cell. So that's important. But for the most part, it's having enough viable yeast there. And if you've got enough viable yeast there, you shouldn't have a problem with the fermentation. Probably the biggest thing I see with questions, both from homebrewers and commercial brewers, is like, I've got poor attenuation, and why is that? And a lot of the time, it's the grist and the recipe, the malt recipe. So that they might have like 20% roasted or caramel malts, and they've included that in the fermentable material, and it doesn't ferment to the same degree as the pale malts do, because a lot of that extract is unfermentable, and therefore you end up with a lower attenuation than you would expect. The other is probably underpitching. So underpitching both using wet and dry, and it's easy with wet to get something that's not in great condition because it deteriorates because it's not dry and it's wet. If you've got some yeast that's less than stellar in its kind of activity or its viability, then you would probably see poor attenuation, and that's very common. But yeah, having enough yeast cells, and then probably your malt bill is the main things. I mean, from my perspective, it's quite hard to get a beer that won't ferment, but it happens a lot, right? So it can't be that hard.
I think I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood and probably understated points around brewing in general is pitch rate. I think it's one of probably the most important parts to be able to make good beer. It's just getting the right level of yeast into the beer to just create a good fermentation, right? That certainly would be I've almost become almost like obsessive about the correct pitch rate.
If it's wet yeast stone, then I'm always making a starter, so I know that I've got the correct level.
That goes like without saying, really, is wet yeast goes into a starter just because you really want to be pitching a more active yeast, I would say, into a wort rather than an inactive yeast, in my experience. And that may not necessarily be an expert view, but I think just a lot of the time it's not necessarily about a lot of the involved process of making a beer, which is that 5-hour brew day. It's actually just get the right amount of yeast cells into that beer, and it will make good beer. You're not going to get off flavors. You're just going to then get a nice, fermentation profile and flavor profile.
My most recent cock up to date was about 2 years ago, and I'm you know, I'm a bit of an expert when it comes to brewing, but when it comes to cider and winemaking, not so much. And I'd made this cider, and you know, in cider you use sulfur dioxide or Camden tablets just to kill all the wild population to prevent any sort of kind of wild fermentation happening. Well, sulfur dioxide varies in its level of activity, so at low pHs it's much more effective than it is at higher pHs. And I had a apple juice that I just added a generic amount of Camden tablets to, and the pH for this juice, I measured it later, was 2.8. So
I'm sitting there laughing.
How is your
work.
teeth enamel, Andrew?
Straight off the back, nothing's living in that. Straight off the back, there's no bacteria that's going to grow in that. No wild yeast is going to grow in that. You don't need to use Camden.
Well, you can sanitize other stuff with that now, can't you? Because that's like Darsan.
You made hand sanitizer. Congratulations.
So essentially,
no joke.
Bacteria could grow in it. However, your mouth looked like a dog's arsehole.
So no joke. 4 months later, no fermentation. Completely stable. Nothing would ferment it, and I repitched it like 4 times, and eventually I got it to ferment. And the only way I could do it was to put food grade hydrogen peroxide in it to oxidize the sulfur dioxide out, which is maybe a little dodgy, but it worked.
Oh, that's wow. Yeah.
I told my colleague in the wine division about this, and she was like, "What are you doing?" This is. Just looked at me disappointedly.
She looked down slightly to the left.
Drink it? Were you all right?
Just coming back to the.
Oh yeah, it was perfectly drinkable. Yeah.
The viability thing, and specifically for dry yeast, which again is something that I guess would be useful information for a lot of homebrewers. How much of a difference does it make, sort of keeping your dry yeast in the fridge versus just at room temperature? In terms of storage, and what is the shelf life of it, realistically speaking, for being able to follow those pitch rates if you're keeping it that way?
So it's strain dependent, right? So some strains are a lot more resistant to the temperature than others.
Okay.
But we would always recommend keeping them in the fridge, like less than 4.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep them in the freezer, the activity of let's say Nottingham after 3 years after being kept in the freezer is almost as good as when it went in. It's really quite impressive. We put 3 years on it because it drops slightly. We don't put 3 years on it because it stops working. It will still work. It's just that the attenuation might be slightly lower. You might need to use more of it. So it's pretty resilient.
3 years is pretty good.
It's not bad.
I had no idea you could put dry yeast in the freezer.
There we go.
Yeah, you can put it in the freezer.
Right.
Yeah, and it maintains the activity very well. The freezer is only a problem, right? If you've got water molecules in the cells, or there is some obviously, but a lot of water in the cells. So if your yeast was to get damp and then you stick it in the freezer, you'd make lots of ice crystals and they go and kill all your yeast cells. But because there's so little water in it, it can go in the freezer and it's not going to be a problem. So don't open it and stick it in the freezer. But if you want to stick it in the freezer and it's sealed already, it will be absolutely fine.
Good that.
If you're talking room temperature, some of the strains can withstand 40 degrees for about 3 weeks. Things like EC 1118, which is one of the wine yeasts, and Nottingham are very resilient. Then if you look at things like the Cole strain and the New England strain, they can withstand 40 degrees for a day. So it's quite variable. Some are really good at it and some are not. My advice would just be keep it in the fridge or the freezer. Don't keep it out of the fridge or the freezer, because you keep it in the fridge or the freezer, it'll be fine. If you keep it on your windowsill, it'll probably die eventually.
So even dry yeast couriered in the height of summer in the back of a hot van or warehouse can be an issue, I guess, potentially.
Yeah, we ship cold in the summer. And we're shipping from our yeast plants in Austria. And Central Europe in the summer can be 40 degrees, 35 degrees, so everything's cold shipped.
Yep.
Yeah. It makes you think about those sort of slightly dubious homebrew shops where you've got dry yeast just stacked
on the
up
shelf.
in the shelf in the hot window, sort of cooking all day.
Yeah, don't buy it.
Yeah.
I know the one's tricky.
Or buy like 4
Yeah.
times as much as you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of the podcast now. There's basically there's 3 real questions that we want to ask you. I'm going to fire 2 at you right now. You can kind of answer these together. What are Lallmand's best sellers, and which of the newer products that you've released has performed best? You've kind of already answered that one. It's going to be Philly Sour. However, what have you got coming up that you can tell us about? What can we get excited about as homebrews? Because as you might have guessed from this particular podcast, we're all geeks. They're not as geeky as me, but they're still geeks. And what research innovations can we look forward to you guys releasing is the word I'm looking for. You see, this is strong shit. What yeast products are you releasing soon that we can really look forward to?
So the biggest seller still is Nottingham.
There you go.
Which,
Wow.
Yeah, it's funny, but it is. It's probably about a third, I think.
Holy shit!
Yeah,
That's a lot.
maybe. I mean, that includes commercial, not just home, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, on the home side, it's probably less, but on the if you take everything into account, commercial and home, Nottingham is the biggest seller, and it's really big in emerging markets. So like South America, it's massive. South Africa, India, places like that. But then it's also like historically been used in the UK massively and still is. Of the new ones, if we look to the non-souring side, the Verdant has been hugely successful. We already mentioned the Philly Sour, so if you looked at the sour solutions kind of portfolio, that's been huge as well. Looking forward, we're definitely going to bring like a low alcohol yeast to the market, I think. That might be more on the commercial 500 gram side than the homebrew side. Just because that would be aimed at 0.5 or less, right? Rather than your kind of 0.5 to 2. Just because it's actually quite easy to make things that will harbor food spoilage organisms and things that will like actually make you sick in a product like that. So that's probably the rationale behind launching that.
Did Guinness not have to pull theirs initially because of that?
They did, yeah. I don't think it was like a food safety thing, but there was definitely something there that shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Like it was, yeah, not ideal.
Yeah.
But if you look at low alcohol beer, there's a few papers out there, but if you've got a pH above 4.2 and an alcohol below 0.5, then you actually see active growth of E. coli and salmonella in it, which is a big deal. Below pH 4, it dies. But really, you want to pasteurize something like that because, and I mean, it's a tough one. I speak to breweries all the time that don't pasteurize that sort of product, and it's a case of regulation at the moment. There's none, but as soon as you make somebody sick, somebody's going to come along and regulate you. So you probably want to do it properly.
The thing is, in that scenario, like if one person gets sick, odds are you've canned an entire batch. Very good chance you're going to make a lot of people sick, and then you're looking at a lawsuit, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's one you want to do properly, and that's kind of with that new strain. We're going to be saying to people like, we want you to pasteurize it, please. Like some sort of disclaimer, like just make sure you do it properly. Looking beyond that, we're definitely going to do some more GMO strains in the States, which will produce kind of weird, funky flavors. And then we're looking at a Thiol strain. I think we already spoke about it a bit. We might look at a Thiol strain.
Right.
Sorry?
Dried,
yeah. I think so, yeah.
Oh, hello.
But I think that's a way off. That's probably going to be a hybrid. And then looking beyond that, we're looking at some heritage strains as well. So, kind of some old English strains that we've never brought to the market. So there's quite a lot of things like Yorkshire strains or like Edinburgh strains and things like that don't really exist in dry form. No, okay.
No, just stick with Yorkshire.
I'll make a note of that.
Do you know? So the Scottish ale yeasts are meant to be super fruity. Like, did you not watch the IPA one that the Craft Beer Channel did, and they were speaking to the girl in the yeast lab, and she was saying the tests have shown that actually Scottish ale yeasts are bringing loads of more fruit flavors to to the beer.
Because
Correct,
fruit
yeah.
doesn't grow in Scotland, right?
So when you say
Go
Yorkshire
for it.
yeast, you talking like a West
Strawberries.
Yorkshire
Tender tiny.
brewery?
Sorry, I
Are
missed that.
you talking about a West Yorkshire brewery?
Maybe.
Are
Yeah, I
we
mean,
talking
it's up for
1479
discussion.
dried? Is that what we're talking about?
Oh,
Not
sorry, my
necessarily.
phone's ringing. It's my landlord.
At 10:15 at night. Interesting.
Yeah,
Answer it.
strange that. Yeah,
Answer
yeah.
it.
I
Answer
haven't
it.
answered.
Weird
it
how
for
that
obvious
happens.
reasons.
Yeah, he's not giving
Just
anything
nod.
away, is he?
Just nod.
He's
or-
not giving anything.
No,
We need
Yeah,
to play
it's-
poker with this guy.
Yeah,
Tell
it's
him it's burned down and you're in a hotel.
good.
Yeah. So, what aside from the thiols and stuff like that, is there anything researchy that you guys are looking at the moment that we can look forward to? Because we always ask people who come on who are in the industry these things. We want to know what's coming up because honestly, there's 15 people in a chat group with us on Facebook Messenger, and I guarantee you, if you bring something new, you've got 15 people who are going to buy it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
It's the mark.
it's annoying really because we're actually playing a lot with GMO stuff in the States, but that can't hit the European market, so that's quite tricky.
Could we have a dude with a diplomatic bag who could get it and bring it over here for us?
So yeah, I mean, if I don't know about it, sure.
That's cool. That works for me.
It is funny, isn't it? Because it's one of those that there's nothing stopping somebody in the States picking up a couple sachets and then flying home with them. And
I'm sure I've already seen yeast pouches coming across. Someone posted a picture.
I mean,
doesn't surprise me.
Fairly sure that's more than 80 quid for a slant, that though.
Yeah, that's
Flights
an,
are
that's an
expensive.
expensive venture, isn't it?
So we've got we've got loads of Feig strains as well. We have about 25, and we're like, do we launch one or not? So that's like a big.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a
you've
funny
got,
one, 'cause,
you've
like-
got Voss, right? Is that you've got
So
Voss
we've got Voss, but if you
and-
test all the Vosses on the market, they're all completely different.
yeah,
yeah, totally.
So like, we've got Voss, but then we've got other strains. We've got one that's like a Hornendal, but what is Hornendal, right? Like genetically, what is Hornendal? Nobody really knows. So we've got lots that we could try, and we've done a lot of work in the lab on which one we should launch, and it's tough because some of them don't bring a lot to the party, right? They don't bring anything more than the Voss has. So you want to launch something that's different.
Yeah, you do.
But Voss is good.
You want an Ebergarden dry yeast. Yeah, Ebergarden's amazing.
We look at that. Send us a sample.
The person you want to speak to is J-Fork. Speak to Jesper. He's got a fermentation going at the moment, and his spunding valve is spitting Voss yeast out as we sit here.
Yeah.
Speak to Jesper. He'll get you some. He's a good lad.
One of the things I'd quite like to try is a Sahti strain.
A what now?
So Sahti is like a Finnish malt beverage, right? So it's made with malt, so it's kind of like a beer, but it's not hopped, and it's filtered through juniper instead of lautrin. So you sort of like make it in this big trough filled with juniper, and then you filter it through, and it's about 10%. So it's always super strong, and it's fermented with a Finnish baker's yeast, which is called, what is it? Oh, I forget the name of it. Anyway, it's a famous Finnish baker's yeast, and it produces an awful lot of isoamyl acetate, which is the banana flavor in wheat beer. So it's like this 10% malt beverage that tastes of bananas. I want to do one of those.
And juniper.
That'd be good fun. And juniper,
yeah. Jesper's getting annoyed because apparently you're mixing something up.
Oh, it's finished.
You need to join us in the after party for maybe 10 minutes.
I said finish.
Oh, did you? No.
Yeah, he says it's Norwegian. I don't know. I'll give you Jesper.
No, this is definitely Finnish. I've had it.
Oh, okay. Well,
it comes in a pet plastic bottle. It looks really classy.
It's the white lightning of alcoholic beverages in Finland, right? Okay. So the last question that I have, and this is a very important one for anybody who listens to the podcast, is going to know why I'm asking this.
It's a very important question for you, Chris.
It's an important question for the world. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Carry on.
For the world, why don't you have a dried Märzen yeast?
I saw this question. I was like, because most people just use their lager yeast for Märzen.
Give up. No.
But I did a bit of research because I was like, maybe you won't like that answer because I mean that was my answer.
I don't like that answer.
But I googled Märzen yeast that's on the market, and White Labs have one, which is quite low attenuation.
Okay.
Which I was surprised about because most lager yeasts, as I already mentioned, aren't very diverse, and they all attenuate in the mid 70s to the high 70s, and they all produce about the same amount of alcohol when you ferment them. So the fact that theirs is low attenuation implies to me that it might be a type 1 lager yeast, which would be genuinely interesting because nobody uses those for anything. So I kind of want to contact White Labs now and just ask them about it. So we don't have one because most people just use their lager yeast, but White Labs have one, which sounds interesting, and I want to know quite a lot more about it.
Well, which one do you use, Chris? What's your go-to Märzen
820.
yeast?
White Labs.
Yeah,
820.
which is the White Labs one, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And is the attenuation lower than it an ale yeast?
Yeah, it tends to finish around 10-13, 10-12, 10-13.
Which is quite high for a lager.
Yeah. Most of them are around about 10-7, 10-8.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, it's literally, for me, it's the ultimate beer style. If I don't have a keg of Märzen on the kegerator, then generally I've got one fermenting. I just think it's the ultimate beer, but that's just me, and I'm a very weird person, as you may have realised from this podcast. But there needs to be a dried version of the Märzen yeast because it's quite delicate. It doesn't store for very long, so I have to buy it when I'm going to brew. So that's just mine.
So Chris, have you got a Märzen on tap or one fermenting?
I don't, but I do have a fresh pack of yeast. I do have a fresh pack of yeast in here, and it is the next beer that's getting brewed.
I feel like it would be quite a niche product. So if you would commit to buying 2 tons, then we
I mean, 2 tons is a bit much. Yeah, I could probably go a kilo.
Put the hop edition.
If you've always got one fermenting, you'll eventually work your way through it, Chris.
1,000 consistent customers.
Chris, put the hop edition logo on it, and we'll ship it. No bother.
We'll sell it. We'll sell it. We'll buy 2 tons. It's fine. 50 quid, right? I'm from Yorkshire. Right. I have to say, I've thoroughly enjoyed this podcast. I think it's been absolutely brilliant. Andrew, are you willing to stick around for sort of 20 minutes?
Oh, I can have one more, yeah. Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Right. In that case, I'm going to.
I need a wee, though.
That's cool.
That's acceptable.
We all need a wee.
Urination is acceptable. I'm going to pop out a link to the video chat into the YouTube chat. You guys can join. Feel free to pepper Andrew with any and all questions about yeast. But we are going to call this episode, which I think has been absolutely brilliant. I'm looking forward to some of these Thiol yeast coming out as well. Specifically for the more hoppy version of the low ABV that I'm trying to produce.
Get some wins off.
Andrew, thank you very much. You've been an absolute superstar. I've really enjoyed this podcast. It's been great. Guys, say your thing.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think we've all learned some new stuff tonight, so it's been brilliant. So
yeah, I've definitely been taking notes, so that's good.
Yeah, I'm just going to put all my dried yeast in the freezer. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to go out to the garage and do the same.
It'll last forever.
Sorry, Sarah. The freezer's getting taken over.
I have to say, for Andy to be taking notes, that's awesome because he can't write. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us. Episode 56, literally in the bag. Massive shout out to our sponsor, Brewcake Tap. A massive shout out to all of our patrons. We had a new one. Nicholas Gears just joined us mid-podcast.
No way.
So shout out to Nick Gear.
Nice.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this. And Andrew, feel free, anytime you have a new release or anything like that, pop Tricky an email. You are more than welcome back on this podcast whenever you want to come on, mate. I've really enjoyed this. It's been awesome.
Good.
Say goodnight, people.
Night, everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Right, kill your audacity.
Well, press stop.
Yeah.
Save.
So,
Chris
somebody want to talk
Want me to save
Andrew
it?
through saving it, and I'm going to
Tricky.
chuck a link up to everybody.
Save
join.
project as.
Yeah.
No, if you go to
No, you want to do that
export as
first.
WAV,
Export as WAV. Okay.
yeah, and then it will prompt
Choose
you
a
to
file.
save it somewhere. If you save it as episode 56, and then put Andrew and save it for us somewhere.
Right. Before people start jumping in this, I'm going to say bye-bye to YouTube. Everybody say bye-bye to YouTube.
By YouTube.
Catches.
And then once you name it, Andrew, it will come up with a box that will say edit metadata tags. When that comes up, just click OK. Just click OK.
Right. Hope to see you guys on the live stream pretty soon, YouTube. I'm cutting the feed. Love you all.
Start
Bye.
to save. Is it saving now?
It says it's exporting the audio as a WAV, so you